I'm Sarah, and my channel is primarily on TikTok. I'm sorry, I'm screeching. And on TikTok is where just a little over a year ago I decided I was going to make a video and show myself canning. And a year later, I'm sitting at about 1.3 million supporters. So I'm not sure how that happened. Don't ask me, I'm not sure. Thank you. But what did happen was I found this incredible group of people that were either already into canning or were interested in learning this art. And together we've created a really amazing community, helping each other gain food security. That's always been my main goal for my channel, is to help people gain food security and really just get back to the basics. Get back to the basics of some things that we may have lost over time. So a lot of what Tammy and I do is sometimes, quote unquote, not by the book. But what I can tell you is the thousands and thousands and decades of years that we have been canning, we have found what works for us and what doesn't. And so we want to share that with you guys and hope that you will have the same successes that we do today here in the kitchen. So welcome. Tammy is going to start off with showing us how to can milk. We're doing milk first.
So this is my number one most requested thing. This is not, you're not going to find this in the book. It is not USDA approved. Number one, canning milk started about 35 years before the USDA was put into existence. When the USDA first started, it was a meat packing organization. It was not set up to do any of what it does today. And it's still not really funded very well to do any of what it does today. And they just don't have the money to test things. But Mr. Borden, ooh, that's still hot. Mr. Borden has been canning milk for years, or his company, his legacy has went on. And I have the opinion that if you can do it in the store safely and sell it on the store shelves to people, that you can also do it at home safely. For my family, I choose to do this. Somebody asked me earlier, well, why do you can milk? Well, sometimes I can get it really cheap, and then I can can it. I like to go camping, but I don't like my cooler to get all icky and smelly and stinky and, you know, like something spilled in there. So a lot of times I will take my canned milk with me camping and use it for cooking, like, you know, my pancakes or whatever in the morning. Then I have it already pre-measured out. So I like it for baking. It does caramelize a little bit, so it tastes sweeter. So it's not necessarily something you're gonna, though you could put it in the refrigerator and drink it, you'd probably want to make it into hot chocolate or something like that rather than to drink it straight after you can it. But it's perfect for cooking after you can it. Canning milk is probably the simplest thing you will ever do, and it breaks several of the rules that you think you have to know to do canning. So I'm just going to go ahead and just start with it because it's so kind of quick and easy. You want to go ahead, bring it to room temperature before you start. Go ahead and fill your jars up, and you want about a 1/2 inch headspace. And my mother always taught me that the 1/2 inch headspace was about to the bottom. Let me put that down right here in your jar. So if you don't have something like this telling you where the 1/2 inch is, usually it's right here on your jar. Just a helpful tip. So I'm going to go ahead and just repeat that for all 8 of these.
Tammy, I'm going to chime in.
Okay.
So with your canned milk, the thing that you want to keep in mind is it gets slightly thicker and sweeter, like Tammy said, as you can it. And so if you're starting off with a product that is like a 4% milk or a whole vitamin D milk, you're going to end up with something that is more the consistency and the flavor of a condensed milk. So when you're canning milk, if you want 2% to be your end product, you want to start with 1% as your beginning product because it's going to thicken and sweeten. It's also very common for your milks to turn pink, a pinkish hue, or a tan colored hue. That is completely normal. It's not going to change the safety of your food. It's just every cow's milk is slightly different. The lactose in that milk could be slightly different. So it might have a higher sugar content. And sometimes you'll even see that from 1 gallon to the next in the same exact load with the same exact environments. Who in here is already canning? Who already does canning? Yeah, lots of you. And who does pressure canning? Lots more. Okay, so you're going to be real familiar with a lot of the general techniques that we're going to be talking about today. And hopefully we'll have some new tricks and tips for you. But one of the things with milk, make sure whatever you want your end product to be, you scale it back 1% of that before you start. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. So the other thing that goes against what you usually do when you can is you do not want to put vinegar in your canner, and you do not want to wipe the rims of these jars when you put milk with vinegar, because cheese or milk plus vinegar equals cottage cheese. So, you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure every time you wipe the rim, go ahead and put that on, and finger tight. You don't need to crank on these lids. Finger tight. In fact, we got to go to the factory today and got to see the tester that tells us, and I tend to crank my lids way more than Sarah does.
So they have a testing machine at the Superb Canning Factory, the lid factory, where they put the jar on the machine, and then you can twist the lid, and it will calibrate how tight you are tightening that lid. So we all did an experiment this morning where we kind of closed our eyes, we didn't want to look, and we just did it by feel, how we normally tighten our lids. And I was sitting at like a 0.6 to a 1, and Tammy was sitting around
14.8.
Okay. So that just tells you like how we can teach you the same things, and yet they're going to be so slightly different for everybody's kitchen and how you do those techniques. But what Tammy's saying about these lids in particular is these lids have an incredible amount of suction power on them. And so you really don't want to over tighten the bands because you're going to end up with some buckled lids.
So, again,
do you want the
ahead
other one?
And get them into the canner. That's still really cool. I'm a little worried.
Do you want this one?
That'll be all right.
Okay.
We're all getting to use a little different equipment.
We don't have our normal, like from our house kitchen equipment, so we're kind of sharing stuff.
My security funnel, the one that my great-grandma gave my grandma.
Let's talk temperatures. What's the temperature of your water?
I don't know.
Barely on?
Yeah. Well, because I'm starting with room temperature milk, I want to start with room temperature water. Thank you.
Yeah.
I
was trying to prompt you.
I know, but we did the measuring earlier. We got this fancy stove that tells us right now what temperature we're at, so that's pretty cool. But yes, if you're starting with anything cold, you start with cold water in your canner. If you're room temperature water, hot water. You don't want to thermal shock your glass.
My mic is on.
And have it break.
And if they don't show up, that'll be the second one. Okay.
So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead, and I already put my water in here. I'm going to go ahead. You got the lid for this one? Are you hiding it? There we are. That on there. And I like to turn mine around. I know it. Not on yet. I got to see the valve for myself. I have to know where my pressure is. So, yeah. There. I don't think it's supposed to sit down all the way until I start tightening it. This one's a little. They're all down.
All right, so on these pressure canners, do you guys have All Americans? Anybody? Prestos? Okay, so Presto has a little arrow. All American has like a little indent.
Oh.
And you want to line that arrow up with the indent on the canner. And then, there you go.
There we go.
Let's just turn backwards.
There. That's why I like to have it this way, because then I...
And when you're canning at home too, this little piece on the back, and I'm going to get over the anatomy of a canner here in a second, but This little piece on the back is your overpressurized plug. So if your canner goes above pressure, this will pop out. It's a fail-safe kind of mechanism that allows your pressure canner to release a lot of steam so you don't get in a dangerous situation. When you're canning at home, you want to make sure that this is facing away from you. So it's facing towards the back of your stove. Will you ever blow one? Probably not. But if you do, it's going to come out pretty forcefully, and you don't want that pointing towards your kitchen or anybody that could be walking by. So make sure that that's pointing away from you.
So. And then you always work opposite. So if I start with this one, I want to do the one opposite. Milk is a protein, yes. No. Milk is also, what the chemical name for milk is lactic acid. So milk is actually an acid. So it's just a little bit different. It doesn't follow any of the normal rules. I always go back around to make sure I get it on tight. That's just my OCD. So we're going to go ahead and vent this for 10 minutes, just like we would for anything else, and then it's going to be a little different again. So I gotta.
So while that's coming up to pressure, you want me to keep going?
Yes, keep going.
All right, so let's start with the anatomy of the pressure canner itself. I think when people look at this piece of machinery, a lot of you in here are canners, so you're going to know a lot of this stuff, but maybe you're trying to teach some of your family or your friends. I think when they look at this, it's very intimidating, but so is a car when you don't know how to drive it, right? So the thing I always tell brand new canners is read your manual front to back multiple times. Make sure you understand how this piece of machinery works, and then when you're ready to can for the first time, do jars of water. You're not going to lose any food product. At most, you're going to waste some of your lids, but the jars you can reuse, and you're not going to be stressing yourself out with water. So start with jars of water. Today, I'm going to start with jars of chicken, and we're going to talk just in general about meat and how this pressure canner works. I think meat is one of the easiest things to can because you can do that meat raw, you can do it cooked. I'm gonna guess that was John. Maybe not. So you can raw pack them or you can can them in liquids. You don't have to can them in liquids. They're very versatile, which is great if you have any type of food restrictions. So meats. We're gonna start with chicken today. The anatomy of this pressure canner is such that you only need a certain amount of water. If you've ever water bath canned anything, you know that you have to submerge those jars completely in water. There's got to be water over the top of it. But with the pressure canner, all we need is enough water to create steam, pressure, inside the pressure canner. So the canner itself, this the bottom part or the pot, this is where your jars and your water are going to go in. For this particular brand, this make, this model, that's going to be 2 to 3 inches of water. If you have a different brand, you're going to want to read that manual again so you know how much water to put in these. We're going to create steam in that, but all the magic happens because of this lid. This lid is what allows the steam pressure to build inside that canner. So we were talking earlier about how to put the lid on. There is a little notch here and a little arrow, and you're just going to line those two things up, and then you turn to lock. Now on this particular canner, it has another little safety mechanism, and that is the bayonet fingers underneath. So as you're turning your canner, those fingers engage and they lock underneath the canner, so that helps as well. And then you have your wing nuts, as you saw Tammy do just a little bit earlier. You pull those up in the opposite direction, and the reason we do that is this canning lid needs to be flat. If you have one side that's up a little bit more than other, what happens to the steam inside? Yeah, it starts to escape. And what happens when you lose steam in the water canner? You're going to run it dry. You run it dry, then you're going to possibly damage your canner. You don't want to do that. We all spend a lot of money on these, right? So we don't want to damage them. You want to make sure that that lid is on flat. So as you're pulling these wing nuts on top of here and you're tightening them down, you also need to be kind of on eye level with the canner. And what you're looking for is a nice even seal around that. If any time during your venting process, like Tammy's doing right now, she's venting that and she's getting the steam to come out of this vent pipe. Anytime during that process you start to see steam come out between the canner and the lid, then you know you're probably a little bit off kilter. You need to get back down and kind of look at that again. That's the number one reason for a canner running dry, is that the lid is not properly put on. So the dial gauge and the vent pipe, they work in tandem with each other. We like to say that, you know, the dial gauge is something that you use with your eyes. It's the visual representation of what's happening inside the canner, while the weight that goes on the vent pipe, that's your audible jiggle. And the weight that goes on the vent pipe, we call that, quote unquote, biblical. That's the one you really got to listen to and you got to pay attention to, because depending on your elevation, your gauge may be off a little bit. It can be 2 plus, 2 minus sometimes. And so while we love to use the gauge, it's a great way to be able to visually see what's going on inside the canner. What you really want to be listening to is for that audible jiggle of your weight. So we're going to can up chicken. And this is super easy. Oh, as soon as I remove this. I have, oh, thanks, I'll be looking for that later.
Okay, sorry.
All I have here is chicken breast. Now you can use chicken with the bone in. You can use any cut of chicken that you want. I'm just using white chicken breast. It's boneless. It's cubed up into about 1-inch pieces. And the general rule of thumb with raw meat is you can get about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds in a pint jar, and about 2 to 2.5 pounds in a quart jar. So as you're kind of planning out your meals, that's the general rule of thumb. Now we're starting with raw chicken, so it has no heat to it. So I need to make sure that everything I'm using is matching the temperature. Why do we match the temperature of the food going in the jar to the jar temperature itself? Anybody know why? So you don't break the glass, right? There's this thought that has been passed down for generation to generation that you have to sterilize your jars. It's kind of a misnomer. We don't really sterilize jars because you can't sterilize anything in a kitchen in an unsterile environment. So once you boil those jars, are they sterile in the pot? They are. But as soon as I remove that lid, what happens? Anything in the air can get on my jars. Anything in the air can get on my food. So you can't really sterilize things. But what you do want to do is make sure you're starting with good, clean products. So that means hot soapy water. You've washed all your products beforehand, your lids, your rings, your jars, everything. And then we are going to match the temperature of the food going into the jars to the jars themselves. So if you see a recipe calling for heating something, that's why. They want the food hot, they want the jars hot, they want the canner hot when you start. I'm going to fill these to about a 1/2 inch headspace. And again, my 1/2 inch looks different than Tammy's. Yours was more like a 1 inch to me. I know, your kitchen, your rules. It's a can off. And then I'm just going to press this down a little bit, and that's it. Now what is going to happen with this, because it is raw packed, is it's going to create its own juice, and the food itself is going to shrink down. So with Headspace, you always want to start with a headspace that is correct for the recipe. If the recipe calls for a 1/2 inch, you start with 1/2 inch. If you end up at the end with more than a 1/2 inch, that's okay. Food shrinks, food creates its own liquid sometimes. All those things are normal in canning. Have you ever canned peaches and they float to the top? Everybody, right? Everybody should be shaking their head yes. Peaches, fruits, things like that, very normal to separate from the liquid, very normal for them to float to the top. And I think sometimes when we're trying out new recipes and we're trying new things, we're like, is that the way it's supposed to look? You know, we can get kind of put off by that. Whenever I make chicken, on my lives, on my videos, I call this ugly chicken. I know I'm not the only one that calls it that. Why do I call it ugly chicken? It's ugly. The stuff that comes out of these jars, pretty ugly. But how does it taste? What is the texture of canned chicken? Tastes like chicken, yep. Tastes like chicken, and it's very, very tender. It's very tender because it's been pressure cooked.
And juicy, because we kept the juices in the chicken.
Yeah, and you can reserve those juices. You can make your chicken broths out of them. You can add them to your. My dog sits and waits for it because he knows it gets added to the food. So there's definitely uses for the every single ingredient that comes out of the jar when you're done. So you can see how simple this is. If you are new to canning, I highly, highly suggest just starting with meat. Now this recipe will include beef, chicken, pork, whatever you want to do. It also includes game, so if you hunt and you get your deer, your elk, your moose, your bear, all the same. All right, we're going to stop there. That's it. No time at all. I am going to wipe my jar rims with vinegar. So Tammy did not because she's doing milk. We don't want the milk to curdle. I am going to use vinegar. Do you have to use vinegar? No, you don't. You can use just regular water. You could use just a dry cloth if you want to. What is this made out of? Goodness gracious. But all we're looking for is to remove any of the animal fats or food particles that have gotten on the rims of the jars. And that's so we can get a nice even seal all the way around. And even though you may not see any food on the rim of the jar, that doesn't mean that it's not there.
And any food that's left on the rim of the jar could cause your seal failure. So you really want to, that's not a step you want to miss.
Yep. Now if you're adding broth to these, which you absolutely can do, if you want to add broth, you can add water to these if you like. Then you would want to go ahead and do something we call debubbling, which means sticking either, I like a wooden skewer, you could use the back of a spoon. Tammy has an actual debubbler there. She fancy. I got a Dollar Tree wooden skewer.
Hey, mine has a magnet on the bottom, so
yeah. So yeah, you can use anything you want, and you just want to remove as many bubbles as you can kind of see. You can do that by, some people tap their jars on the counter. Some people will just run the debubbler on the outside of it. And the reason we do that is heating. So we want to make sure that we get an even heating all the way through. If you have a liquid and a bunch of food in a jar, and you've got a big air pocket, air does not heat the same way as liquid does. And so the center of that jar may have a lower temperature than the rest of the jar. So that's why we do debubbling.
I lied, I do not this.
You're going to have to put me on a timer because I start talking. Okay.
Yeah.
We got a full, go ahead. Back to Tammy.
You notice the steam has started to come out now, so I'm going to time my 10-minute vent. So we'll see if the owl can keep track.
Good go.
Otherwise, I'll talk and then.
So what she's doing there is venting the canner. And there is actually a reason that we do this. So in canning, this might be a hill that you're willing to die on, and that's okay. As canners, I think we all have those hills that we are willing to die on. And some people will say, venting, I never had to vent my canner. It is relatively new, probably in the last, 15, 20 years. We didn't used to vent the canners, but then it became recommended to us that we vent the canners. So sometimes we just learn things over time. We either decide we want to adapt to that or not. I like to adapt as much as possible. The canner, again, just like the jars, if there's air inside the canner, will that temperature get to the same temperature as the steam? No. So what we have learned is by venting these canners, we, in essence, push all of the air that is inside the canner out. It fills the entire chamber with steam. I know you're looking at me because you need to get your weight on. And it fills the entire chamber with steam, and then we get good heat all the way through. Okay, I thought you were eyeballing
no,
sideways.
I'm
okay.
eyeballing the timer because it's not moving.
Yeah. And
Courtney,
so that's the reason for
8
venting.
minutes on your phone.
All right, what is finger tight? Well, we're all going to have a different explanation for that one too. Like this morning, I never would have dreamed your finger tight was like 500 times more than mine, but okay. So this is what I do for finger tight. This is me and this is how I teach it. Again, when I put this jar on, when I put the ring on, I use 3 fingers. It doesn't matter which 3 you want to use, 3 fingers. And I know you're not going to be able to see me in the back, so I'm going to try to like raise it up and do it. But what I do is I use 3 fingers and I start to tighten the jar down, but I do this on the countertop. When the ring starts to engage with the jar itself and spin, I stop. And that's my finger tight. Now, some people are going yes, and some people are like no. And I get that, I understand. So you do what works for you in your kitchen. If you start seeing lid failures, start adjusting how you're tightening. If you start seeing buckling of the flats,
You've tightened it too much.
you've tightened it too much. Yeah, start backing it off a little bit. If you're using other brands of lids, you may have to adjust. I don't know if anybody uses like the Tatler lids or the other ones that are the non-disposable. They have a very steep learning curve to them. There's a way that you have to tighten the band, untighten it, and then retighten it again. So depending on your lid will depend on what your finger tight is, but that's how I do mine.
So
You've got the only canner. No, I have another canner.
You've got one over there.
Never mind. It's like I can't keep going. Yeah.
all right, I'm going to take over for a second.
Yeah, do your thing.
They were very kind and gave me the kind I really like. If you don't have one of these, you might want to change your weight out for one of these. This is 5, 10, 15, all in one piece. And you don't have to, did I get that little ring off? Did I put this on there? Do I have the right one? Is this the 5, the 10, the 15? Now, ordinarily, the pressure goes by your altitude. So if you don't know what your altitude is, you don't know what pressure you're supposed to use on this dial. Most of America, it's 10. If you're in the mountains, it's going to be 15. If you're down at sea level like Florida, it might be 5. I told you milk is one of those things that breaks all the rules of what you think you know about canning. Ordinarily, where I can, I'm a 10. Everything I can at 10 pounds of pressure, because that's what the pressure is for my altitude. As we talked about earlier, milk is an acid. It doesn't need me to do 10. It only needs me to do 5 for my altitude. I'm not trying to cook it. I'm not trying to caramelize it. I'm just trying to kill as many of the pathogens as I can inside that jar so that that can is preserved. And I'm using milk I canned 6 years ago. So I'm going to go ahead now that we've vented for our time, put that on there at 5. And I'm already at 10 pounds of pressure, so we can turn that way down. I'm going to let that go for a minute. So,
You talk about the spoon.
yeah, let it equalize. So the other thing about milk, go ahead. I'm normally 10 pounds where I live. Milk is an exception to that rule of always using the same pounds of pressure for your altitude. Milk is 1 lower. So if you're 10, you would use 5. If you're 15, you would use 10. If you're 5, you still got to use 5 because you still have to use 5. But milk is an exception. It's just one of those things. There's a couple other things, like if you really wanted to can fruit, then you sometimes do it at 5 instead of 10 because you don't want to wind up with mush. So you just bring it up to pressure, which we are way above our 5 pounds of pressure, and then you turn it off. So the other thing about milk, breaking all the rules, there's no time for milk. When you bring the milk up to your pressure, you're done. Ideally, then you let this canner sit until it's cool to the touch on the outside. I'm not touching this canner right now with my bare hand. But in a couple of hours at home, it would be cool to the touch. Then I would open up the canner and take everything out. Today we're going to do it a little bit faster because Sarah needs to use things too here. But we're at 15.
That thing is cranking.
Yeah, this is a little, it wasn't on, I turned it on, I didn't need to turn it on that high. This is new equipment for us. We've never used the commercial. I got a little gas stove at home I love to cook on.
Yeah.
So
Just, you see how that thing is really hula hoop dancing, really spinning? So with these canners, that is too much of a jiggle. That's what we call that,
you don't want to doing that.
You don't want to doing that. So what do you do in full panic mode if your canner starts jiggling and freaking out and it's making you freak out? What should you do?
Turn off the heat off.
Turn it off, right? What do you do if somebody pulls out in front of you in traffic? Press your brakes, right? So stop, turn off the heat, walk away, let it, it's going to start to cool. You can already see it's dancing a lot less. But remember, you're always in control of your canner. And if you're teaching new people how to can, remind them that they are also always in control of that canner.
This is how I think of it, and I was raised in Florida, so I'm a little bit of a southern gal sometimes. This one just dances around, but you have the other weight that jiggles, and it makes that rocky sound, and you know you can go in another room and know how your canner's doing by that rocky sound. Some people say, how do I know if I've got that rock at the right time? Well, you can sit there and measure how many rocks per minute you're doing, or I think of it like a rattlesnake. I want to be like the rattlesnake is telling me it's over there and to stay away. If that rattlesnake is telling me, you're right here, you're about to step on me, get away, that's too much of a rock. So that's how I think of it. You don't want a big, like it's doing there, you don't want that big rocky thing. You want it to just be an even, slow, steady rock. So we're just going to let this done. The milk is now done. As soon as the canner is cooled, that milk is done. I'll wipe the jars down and put them on my shelf. Yes. You're going to get a very rich product. It's going to be more like a coffee creamer. Yeah. And the secret is if you like flavored coffee creamer, put a little flavoring in there and you're all set.
Yep.
But it's going to be very, very rich. The sugars in the milk caramelize, so it might be a little bit more of a browner color or a creamy color, and it's going to be very much sweeter because you've just caramelized all those sugars just as if you've baked them in the oven on top of that pie, and that sugar on top of the pie caramelizes and it just tastes so good. It's going to be more caramely. That's why I use it more for cooking, or I'm going to use it with making chocolate milk for my kids when we're out camping, as opposed to drinking it like, oh, I'm going to put this on my cereal and drink it. It's not going to be that kind of a product.
So I find with milk, and this is just my personal experience, maybe yours is the same, the fresher the product, the better the end product, right? So the fresher your milk, the better the end product. I also prefer my milk in pints. I find that when it gets in quarts, it likes to separate on me, which is still usable. I can still use it for baking and things, but I like mine in pints a lot better. And if you're going to do things like chocolate milk or strawberry milk or like a flavored milk, the store-bought ones don't work well. They have additives in them and preservatives and things. Thickeners. It just doesn't work well. So if you want to make a chocolate milk or a strawberry milk, my suggestion is use a good milk and then add your own cocoa powder and sugar. Okay. Add your own cocoa powder and sugar, or add your own macerated strawberries or something like that. It's a much better end product.
We never thought about how we're going to get this off here to let it set so you can use it.
We're not.
Do you have another?
I have another stove. I could use this one back here.
Okay.
I'm not moving that thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the thing we were like.
I mean, she got a little angry earlier.
Yeah. She went. This cooker is pretty.
If you've never done any canning outside, there's a little bit of an art to it. Yeah. And when you have a brand new canner, brand new stove, tent, yeah. I mean, I ain't scared, but I'm
not scared either.
Okay. So I'm going to get the chicken going, and then we're going to just keep on rolling with all these canning things. If you guys have questions, please raise your hand. I think we're a small enough group here that we can get to those.
If you've got your own cow, you've got the milk, and it's been in the refrigerator, the cream is separated
Yeah.
from the milk, should you keep that all together?
I take the cream out. Yeah.
Yeah. Make butter.
I assume if you are butchering your own chicken, you don't have to have milk and add it to it. You might add water.
Not necessary. Yeah, she's asking if you're butchering your own chicken, if you should add any water to it because you might get a little less broth. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, it's still not necessary. So you can if you want to. If you want to add a little bit of water to it to make a more hearty stock or make more broth in the jar, you absolutely can. But from a safety perspective, it is not needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can add a little salt to your chicken too, or even a little meat tenderizer if you want to do that. Again, that won't affect the times or the safety of it.
I always add water when I do my chicken because I like gravy. So, you know, you get another product out of that if you add the water. You get that broth. You can use it for gravy. You can use it for other cooking. You know, even if you don't want it, you can drain it off and use it for other cooking. So I always add the water. But that's, again, it's a personal preference what you like to do.
Yeah, and what's great about canning is as you're going along on your canning journey, as you're learning to can new things, write them down. Because you are not going to remember from one season to the next what you did. So you're going to open yeah, you're laughing. I know you know what I'm talking about, right? So you're not going to remember how you made your pasta sauce last year. You're going to think you did, but it's the same thing when you plant your seeds and you don't use the little markers. Yeah, you don't remember. It's the same thing with canning. So keep yourself a journal, and then that way you can say, you know what? I want to add a little bit more water to my chicken because I liked having that extra broth for my gravies.
Or it wasn't salty enough or it was too salty.
Yeah, I made corn last year way too salty. No, same amount of headspace. Whether it's liquid or it's food in all of your recipes, same amount of headspace. So as you're packing things into the jars, if it has a broth to it and you're like, oh, I can't bring it up to the proper headspace, I didn't make enough broth, add more meat to it. Or if it's a soup, add more veggies. Just get yourself to that proper headspace with whatever the ingredients are in the jar. Yes? Yeah. Yep.
What I have gone by is if it comes in below the pressure that it's supposed to be, you start over with your timer. Is that correct?
Yeah, so your
Shut it down, it's gonna
yeah. Okay, I'm gonna give you book and I'm gonna give you real life. Okay, so can we all agree that we're all on the same page with this? Yes? All right, nobody's coming after me later? All right. I don't have a car, so don't meet me in the parking lot. Okay, so your book recommendations are going to be that anytime your canner falls below on its gauge and you lose pressure, you must start that whole thing over again from zero. Like you must start the whole recipe. It doesn't matter if you had 3 minutes left on the timer and it was going to be done, or if you're at the beginning of the, okay, all right. The Sarah way. Okay, I use kind of my own, if I'm close to the end of a cycle and I was supposed to be canning at 10 and it fell to 9, I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to add another 5 minutes on to the end. Okay? I'm still standing here. It's been 30 some years, so I must be okay. But use your best judgment always in your kitchen.
At 50 years, I'm going to tell you that if it falls to 9, I'm going to crank the heat back up and I'm using the same time. I
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I usually just tack on a little bit of time to the end once I've raised that pressure. Now, I've never had it fall from like a 10 to a 5 and me be out in the garden doing something because I'm constantly near my canner when it's going. So the minutes, and seasoned canners will tell you, we can tell if that canner has stopped jiggling or if it's making a noise it's not supposed to, because you'll see us run across the kitchen and trip over the dog. Yes, that is not a personal story. Yes, it is. I just tack that time on at the end because I pretty much know when it went down in pressure. You're welcome.
Shiz-
When you do the chicken, some of the juice comes out, right?
Yes.
And so doesn't that make it greasy, and is that a problem?
It does make the inside of your canner greasy and your jars greasy. So that's why she puts a little bit of vinegar in the bottom of her jar. Well, once you've and I'm going to give you by the book again. You've waited that 24 hours to make sure you have a seal. Then you take your rings off and you wipe them again, and you use vinegar again when you're wiping them. You know, just a dash on your cloth, your wet cloth you're wiping them with, and that will take the grease off. Because yeah, you don't want to put them away like that, or they will mold on the outside of your jar, and then who wants to eat that? You know, it's still gross. So you do want to do that, and you will want to wash your canner out after you've ran anything with fat or grease or meat.
So just to chime in on that, I think a lot of times what happens when our jars don't seal and we see a lot, you ever open your canner and the water on the inside is either greasy or you've got red tomato products, that's from siphoning. And so there's ways to help with siphoning to help reduce those. Can you get away from it 100%? Not usually, but there's ways to reduce it. And so you can reduce siphoning by doing a couple things. One, by really controlling the depressurization of your canner. So when our canner timers are up, raise your hand if you walk over the stove and you turn it completely off. Right? I think most of us do. But if you have problems with siphoning, you can actually turn that canner down and bring it even slower in its depressurization if you have problems with siphoning. The other thing is if you do just turn it off, as soon as that's down to 0, anybody stand over there like, hurry up, I want to go to bed, hurry up, I want to go to bed, right? You're waiting for the dial gauge to go down.
Like
What's
now?
the first thing you do? You go over and you pop it off and you start unlocking it and everything. Well, that inside of that canner is still boiling extremely hot. So what I have found is I take my weight off and then I leave it for 10 minutes. I use a 10-10-10 rule. I know, it just tacked 30 minutes onto your night. I understand, but it does help with the siphoning. I take the weight off, I wait 10 minutes. I unlock the lid and I wait 10 minutes. I prop the lid up, but I don't take it off all the way, and I wait 10 minutes. And then I take my jars out. And what I've done is I've not only brought that down to 0, but I've also given the jars a time to kind of cool down a little bit easier than being in 240 degrees to 70 degrees. It's like a slap in the face to the jars. They want to siphon. That's what science does. The pressure inside the jar wants to come out. So the only way we can cut down on that is by controlling that depressurization. So I hope that helps. I think a lot of us have had siphoning issues at one time or another, and that will help keep down that fat and give you a better seal.
And canning isn't something you can rush. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it's
really,
just not.
this is something you're going to, you know, you wouldn't go do a Rembrandt painting and rush it. You say, okay, today I'm going to can something, and you allocate a lot of time to it. And if you can't, then you might not want to start that project till the next day when you can. You know, life happens though.
I'm just going to get this chicken started because it's
Okay.
going to take some time, and we can answer questions. And we are doing a giveaway. I think John said he wanted it at like 2 o'clock. We're getting close to that for an All-American 921.
All right. Do you want me to?
Not one of these, though. We're using these. You get one in a box. This is a new canner for me, so all you see me doing is I'm testing. If you filled out one of the forms, my sound's off.
Is mine on?
I'm off. Okay, can you turn me back on?
So if you filled out a survey, Sarah was saying, already with them, then you'll be in the drawing. So,
So yeah, you got the microphone. Tell them about the paper.
all right. Here, why don't I stand next to you when you just talk?
Hello.
Here, you can tell them about it.
Fill out the piece of paper over there. That's it.
Well, I said that. I didn't know if there was something more you wanted said.
No, go right
No,
to it.
it's not time yet. You can go.
Hello. I'm sorry. I think I messed it up.
We want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to do that. So while she's having technical difficulties.
Sarah, that's the way it is, Sarah.
Yeah.
Your mic isn't working well.
I know. Hey, I almost set that pot on fire this morning.
Yeah.
There's a piece of paper in it. Who puts a piece of paper in a pot?
So we're also going to be doing cowboy candy, although you're not really supposed to use that name. There's some copyright thing. So we're going to call them candy jalapeno peppers, but we all know what it really is. And, you know, we all call it that, whether, you know, I'm not going to sell it, so I can call it that, right? I have a couple different peppers here to show you. I've already cut mine up. I cheated. I cut it up. You guys don't really want to see me cry, right? These peppers right here, do you see they have all the and they're starting to get a little wrinkly. And then this one is nice and shiny. It doesn't have a lot of those striations, we call them, on there. Which pepper, my right hand or my left hand? Hold up your hand. Which one you think is hotter than the other? Because I can tell by looking at these pepper which one is hotter. So if you think the one in my left hand is hotter, hold up your left hand. And if you think the shiny, smooth one in my right hand is hotter, hold up your right hand. All right, everybody with their left hand up, you are correct. So when you go to buy peppers and you see these little marks on them, even though they're the same, they came off the same plant, you picked them at home off the same plant, this one's going to be a little bit hotter than this one. So if you're looking for more heat or less heat. When we go ahead and cut these up, we wanted this batch to be a little hotter, so we did not go through and de-seed all of these. When you're making it, if you want it a little more mild, take the seeds out. If you want it to be hotter, go ahead and leave the seeds in. So I have already cut up a giant bag of peppers there. So this recipe is, before I get into it, how close are we?
I'm just going to yell. Oh, I'm on again. No, she said I move around too much. Yeah, I move around too much. So I'm using a brand new canner that I've never used before. I've used this model. I have several of these in my house, but so I'm just doing a basic overall check, and you guys should too when you get new canners. I'm checking the vent pipe, making sure I can see a light all the way through that. If you can't, you may have a little bit of water buildup in there. You can run a straight paper clip down through there and just kind of knock out any debris that might be in there from food or whatever, but I checked that. That looks good. The lid was very tilted, so when I put it on, my wing nuts were in a spot that was very tilted, so I had to play with the wing nuts a little bit more than my canners at home, but we've got that all set up now. I've got 3 inches of water in there with a splash of vinegar. That's just to keep my jars from getting cloudy. And I'm going to go ahead and get this canner started, and then we're going to vent for 10 minutes. I think we're just going to keep going, right?
Okay,
You're just going to keep going with the cowboy
I didn't know how
candy?
close we were to, yeah.
Yep. We'll let these people fill their forms out, and then we'll do the drawing.
All right. So, when you cut up your jalapenos, wear gloves. If you don't wear gloves, or you don't have them, and you decide to cut up your jalapenos anyway, be sure to have some of that milk laying around because you're going to need it. That's the one thing that will cut the oils on from the pepper. Milk is the antidote to that. So if you get it in your eye, if you get it in your hands, if you ingest it and you don't like the heat, get some milk. That's the antidote. So Mother Nature's wonderful about that. So when you do this, you want to make sure you cut your peppers evenly, whatever thickness you like. But in order for it to cook properly, it needs to be very similar thicknesses of each piece. So I don't use a mandolin because I like my fingers. You see, I still have 10. If you can use the mandolin, I really admire you. I hope you're wearing safety gloves and you have a supply of Band-Aids, maybe 3 or 4 boxes. But I just don't do the mandolin because I like to keep all my fingers. So once you get all of your peppers cut and in your pot, Now comes the art. Cooking is both a science and an art, and this part is art. So although I have the ingredients for cowboy candy here, you can vary them to your taste. Remember, the only thing we're using in this recipe that's preserving this is the sugar and the vinegar. So if you have a pickling recipe, you want to make sure that you have the water to vinegar you don't vary that. That ratio stays the same. But the spices, you can vary them. You can vary them to your taste. They're not there to preserve it. They're not there to make it safe. You can make this your own. You don't have to follow the recipe exactly by whatever. So, if you like it a little spicier, you like a little more cumin, you don't like cumin or, whatever and things, then you can do it.
I like end of the garden stuff too. Just use the basic sugar and all the spices and everything that she's doing, and then whatever peppers are in the garden, that's what's going in.
Now, you have to watch
done
out with
that.
mixing the peppers.
Some of the ghost peppers are too high.
I like to stay with all green or all yellow and red. Once you start mixing the greens and the reds and the yellows in this, sometimes you wind up with a unappetizing brown product.
Yeah, they're kind of brown.
So try to stay all red or all green, unless brown is one of your favorite food colors. It's just, people don't generally find that, except for gravy, attractive.
Or my kids. Is that supposed to look like that? Yes. I intentionally did that.
So for my brine that I'm going to make, and I'm going to make it right in the pot because, you can make it ahead of time. I've seen people do that, but I really, really just like to use one pot and only wash one pot at the end of the day because I've already been in the kitchen all day. I don't want to do dishes too forever. So I have about 3 pounds or maybe a little bit more in here. I may have to adjust this one. So I want 2 cups of vinegar and 6 cups of sugar. I did mention these were candied, so yes, I really am going to use that much sugar. So there's 2. And you really don't have to worry if you make too much brine. There's no such thing as too much brine with cowboy candy because any leftover brine, I'm going to go ahead and process for the same time as I do the cowboy candy, and then I'm going to use that to marinate my steak or my roast or my meatloaf or whatever. I think that was 4 cups, so I think this is 6. That's what happens when I talk. I forget to measure. All right. So then I have 6 tablespoons of mustard seed because it's sort of a pickle recipe.
Are you on the timer and the canner? Becca.
I got a teaspoon of turmeric. That's a popular food additive right now. It'll make my achy joints feel better, maybe. Can't say that, but maybe, Talk to the people about the health benefits of things. But food is medicine.
I'm going to get your milk open.
I got cayenne pepper. No.
10 minutes.
Yep, just...
Oh, you have a timer set.
No. You just...
Okay.
Actually,
Never
it's
mind.
not... The milk's not done until it's cool. So I'm just going to
Oh,
pull
you're
it
going to
off.
let it completely cool in
Yeah.
there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
Celery seed.
Huh? Nope, it's good.
And again, 1 teaspoon, give or take, an eyeball. Measure with your heart, not the spoon. And then 3 tablespoons of garlic powder, because who doesn't like garlic in their food? But if you don't, you could, make it a little different. And then I'm going to put this on the stove, and I'm going to cook it.
I
And I'm
cleared
gonna
a stove
put on
for
there.
you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to cook those for about 10 minutes. Huh? Oh. And we're going to cook this just until our peppers start to get a little translucent. Because we're really cooking them in the jar, but A lot of it. All right. I don't think I need it super boiling here.
If you guys have ever made cowboy candy, we're not allowed to call it that, candied jalapenos. If you've ever made this, it smells like dirty feet. Like,
Sarah?
I'm sorry, it does.
No, you touched the stove, didn't you?
No. Oh, I probably did. I mean, all I did was.
Error. I'm getting an error code.
I've broken everything I've touched today, so I'm not surprised. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Oh my gosh, have you seen all the plugs down there?
She's got the right one. Don't worry, you got tech support on the ground.
All right. I'm sorry, I
This
needed
is
to
why
smell
I
the
brought
dirty
my.
feet.
This is why I brought my emotional support humans. You know, my dog doesn't have opposable thumbs. I'm not bringing an emotional support dog. So
How about now?
it's not. We gotta wait just a minute till it goes through its little. Well, it's waking up. Let it wake up.
This is, yeah, this.
You grab that one.
I locked myself in the stairwell at the last hotel. Brown sugar? No sugar? Are you talking about like sugar substitutes in general? So I think everybody has kind of a favorite of that. Some people use honey. Some people like maple syrup. I like Splenda. I don't know. It's just because it's really sweet, but I know a lot of people don't like Splenda. When you're doing things like jams and jellies, though, and you're substituting actual sugar, you want to make sure if you're using a store-bought box of pectin, that you're using the correct box. So there are different pectins for different types of sugar. So just make sure if you're using a low sugar, no sugar recipe or something like a honey, that you're using the correct box of pectin.
This was fine. So I
But
took the pad off.
everything is to taste.
And now
I
I'm getting
I made
an
corn
error
cob jelly the other
code.
day, and we used all honey for it, and it's delicious.
We
but it
unplugged
just
that
tastes
one
like
and plugged it
straight
back
honey.
in.
Like I totally killed the flavor of the corn cob. So
What did I do to it?
sometimes I just play with recipes until I get the right, sugar substitute that I like.
That one wasn't working, so I just took the boiling water pot off and put this one on.
Maple syrup is a little less sugary than actual sugar, and you're also going to get a lot more brine because maple syrup is like So you either have to decide, do you want more liquid or do you want more sweetness?
Okay.
I
thank
would
you.
go, how much maple syrup would you do if
You-
you were doing?
If you could do the same amount, like if it's 6 cups, you could do 6, you would take 6 cups, and for every cup you would subtract a quarter cup because you don't want, that's the added extra liquid. So for every cup you would subtract a quarter cup. That's the rule for honey.
Yeah.
So for honey you
The
take
other
it, so
thing
I do
I
the same for
do is
maple
I'll
syrup.
boil it down to reduce it. So if I have fresh maple syrup, like if we just tap the trees, it's a lot runnier than anything else. I'll boil it down sometimes till I reduce it and then add it to it, so I have less liquid. The best thing about this recipe and the candied jalapenos is the brine. I don't want to step on your toes,
No,
but
go ahead. Go
okay.
ahead.
The brine, if there is extra brine, I can all the brine because I use it on my ham, on my meat glazes. We make peanut brittle with it for spicy peanut brittle.
It was working
The
fine
brine
when
has
I
a lot of uses,
Took the boiling water
so I don't mind
pot
having
off
extra.
that I had prepared
Yeah.
and put this on because this one wasn't. It did the same thing. That's why. Okay, I will do this on the barbecue.
I'm sorry, what do you need?
I found the answer to our question.
Do you need this one?
It's a convection oven, and I'm not using a convection pot. Induction. Sorry, it takes a special pot. That's why. Yeah.
Well, I screwed this one up and I apologize.
No, it's the same thing. I put this.
Only
It's
the stainless steel magnetic pots will work on these.
Oh, okay, so I didn't mess it up.
so. All right. Now it should work. We'll put this back on because I need it. There. Yeah. Okay.
All right,
So,
I'll get you going over here.
all right. Wrong one.
Yep.
All right.
I do know how to work this one. Now that you showed me how to turn on the propane.
We're not going to tell them that, though.
It's okay.
That's
My
a
mic
secret.
is live. They can hear. Oh, there's another propane tank over here.
Perfect.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. And I'm on high. All right. So, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and cook these until they're translucent. You know, it's like 5 to 10 minutes. It's, you know, again,
And
use your
I'll go
heart
off.
and your eyeballs.
All right, while she's getting that heated, All American has drawn. So this is for John. John from All American. Is he over there? Hey, is this for a 921? It's for a 921 All American pressure canner. And you have to be present to win. So if this person isn't here, then we're going to draw the next name. I'm going to butcher this. Is it Sydney Foster? Sydney Foster?
Sydney.
Is it Sydney Foster? Sydney or Sydney Foster? She's not here. Okay, I'm gonna wait
Foster.
like 10 more seconds. The winner of the All-American 921 for today, there's only one winner today and one tomorrow, is Sydney or Sydney Foster. Okay, I'm moving on. Huh. Shannon Foster, same last name. Shannon Foster, anybody know the Foster family? They apparently... Whoa, let John do it. There we go. Is there a Shannon Foster under this tent? Shannon Foster. How about a Sydney Foster? Well, I'm just giving them a minute. Maybe they're slow walking. All right, I'm giving them a minute. I mean, same area code, so I'm assuming this canner's going home with this family. Same last name. All right, Tammy, back to you.
Okay, well, not much to say about this part. This is really hot. Try not to get any of the jalapenos, especially now that they're cut apart. I have asthma, so just a second. Sorry. Not a whole lot to talk about while I'm watching them cook. Sorry again. Just dry throat.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That pot smells like stinky feet. I'm
Yeah.
promising you guys.
Well, I have asthma, so.
Oh, you are right.
Yep.
How about a Coke?
So, things that we can do with cowboy candy. I have seen some pretty amazing things with cowboy candy, but the most out there is using it as a topping on cheesecake. A lot of people, that the charcuterie board thing is really popular now. You can take the cowboy candy and use it as a spread on top of cream cheese and put them on top of crackers. Oh, that is so delicious. So, you know, you have unexpected company come over and you're like, what do I serve them? I don't have any appetizers or hors d'oeuvres or what. I'm not that fancy at home, but, you know, if you're that kind of fancy, you know, you have instant hors d'oeuvres in your pantry right away, as long as you have cream cheese and crackers. A lot of people put it on top of their meat when they're barbecue grilling and use it as a meat marinade. If you have any of the broth left, you're a brave woman. There we go. Get that out of there. They use it for a marinade on meat. You can use it as a topping on your meatloaf. A lot of people love it on their hamburgers when they're grilling out in the summer. They'll have it out as a condiment, like a relish, and they put it on top of their burgers. Do you have a question? Oh. It's 3 pounds of peppers, chopped. And if you want them hot, leave the seeds in. If you want it milder, de-seed them. 2 cups of vinegar, 6 cups of sugar, 6 tablespoons of mustard seed, 1 teaspoon of turmeric, 1 teaspoon of celery salt, 3 tablespoons garlic powder, and 1 teaspoon cayenne pepper. And I may add a little bit more. I have a little bit more peppers in there, I think, than the 3 pounds, so I may wind up adding a little more vinegar. I don't want any more sugar, but I do want enough that there's liquid in the pot that it can cook. So, and always wear gloves. Make sure you write that with the recipe. Always wear gloves when you're handling jalapeno peppers.
And a mask,
or any
'cause
hot
they
pepper.
stink. And a mask. Yeah. It's the apple cider vinegar. It's just very strong.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna draw again because the foster family isn't here. So is under this tent Lauren Miller. Lauren Miller. Lauren Miller from area code 303 or 330. Lauren Miller. I don't know. Lauren Miller. That's better. Louder. Louder? Hello, if I could have your attention, please. I have a winner for the All-American 921. Is there a Lauren Miller? Lauren Miller. If you are in the back of the tent, please shout or I'm moving on.
Lauren Miller.
This is crazy. I will take it. Oh.
And who didn't get to fill out a form?
You guys you all didn't fill out forms?
We ran out.
Oh. Well, we're going to run out of drawings here in a second. Okay. Jevin Cole. Jevin Cole. If you are Jevin Cole, could you raise your hand? We are trying to give you an All-American pressure canner. No, you can't.
You need
Jevin
a driver's
Cole.
license or a mother or somebody.
I'm glad this is like live broadcasted right now because people are going to be like, I won a pressure canner? Yeah, 3 days ago.
And you didn't.
That's a recording. Do you want me to keep going? Did you bring more forms?
No, this is the one you just gave me.
I think it's Ian. I-A-N, Ian, last name M-E-S-K-E, Mesky, or
Ian Mesky.
Nesky. Ian, is there an Ian under this tent?
Ian Metsky.
Ian Nesky. You've won an All-American 921 pressure canner. Ian, where are you? Anybody out there?
Is anybody out there?
Just go right on the back of somebody else's form. I don't know. All right, he'll be back with more.
Okay.
You've only done water bath? Yeah. Yeah. So I have thoughts on the electric pressure canners. I personally do not own one. My mother does. She absolutely loves her. So I've got nothing negative to say about them. Yeah, but I will say make sure you really read the manual because some of them are not made for that. Like people,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
yep.
Well,
Yeah. So if it's something like that, then yeah, it was made for pressure canning. But a lot of people want to know if they can pressure can in an instant pot. The answer to that is almost always no. There's only like one brand. Is it the XL?
The Power Pressure XL
The
is
XL.
approved for canning.
You can only do small jars.
Yeah, it only
Yeah,
can do
it's good
4
for
pints.
small batch canning. Small batch. Yep.
And just, you can only do 4. You need, when you're looking at those electric canners, they need to be able to maintain, for me, 10 pounds of pressure, and you need to be able to maintain it for the length of time you're going to pressure can something. So the only one I found that does that is the Power Pressure XL. I've used it good, but I would rather do, for the same amount of time, I'd rather do 9, 18 cans as opposed to 4. Same electricity. You got to read the manufacturers, and it has to be flat. So even when you're doing water bath on that, if you have the one that has the grooves, you're not supposed to use the one with the groove. It has to have a flat bottom.
What we'll do is, and run this by David maybe, when she's done canning hers.
You have to make sure the ring is the same size as your pressure.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
your pressure canner hangs off that ring,
Yeah. Courtney made a really good point. You can have it on the electric stoves with the glass top ceramic stoves. You can't have it bigger than the burner. It has to be fit on that. And the weight. You have a weight problem. You can't get too much weight on those. So you really have to look at your instructions. Try again.
Yeah, if I didn't mess up my mic. Okay. Okay. This is drawing number, I don't know. I've lost count. Yeah, 9, 10. Abby Steiner. You've got to be kidding me. Abby Steiner, you've won an All-American 921. Abby Steiner, are you under the tent? Abby?
You have to be present to win.
Yeah.
I'm president and I think I'm in there. I'm president. Come on.
Well, we're getting there.
Abby Steiner, come to the canning table. If you are under the tent, you have won an All-American 921. You've got 62 seconds.
Here, just give me those. Do this one.
I haven't done this one yet.
Do this one.
Has it been 62, you think? Okay, this is the last and final name, and then I'm taking it home with me. I'm just kidding. Kristen Hill. Kristen?
Kristen Hill, are you here?
She's here! Congratulations! You won an All-American 921, and you won it on the first draw. You are super lucky. Go buy a lottery ticket. Congratulations. Oh my God. Go back here and see John. Yay!
All right, well, that has got to cook for a few minutes. Those are pretty thick slices, and it's taken a little while. Do you have anything else you want to talk about while it's...
Do we want to
That's all right.
ask any questions? Because what we're going to do is we're going to water bath can this jalapeno. I've got the chicken going here. We're probably going to take a little short break, and then we're going to come back and do beef carnitas. Yeah. Yeah, so her question was, what if I don't have enough liquid in my jar? Like if I'm doing pasta sauce and it doesn't quite get to that headspace that I need it to be to, can I still can it? Yes, you can, but you know what I would do? I would add a little extra till I get to the proper headspace. So either a little extra water, a little extra broth, chunk a couple tomatoes in there, whatever you have extra to kind of bring it up to that proper headspace. Because what you don't want to end up with a jar that's not full, and you also don't want to overfill it, right? Because then you get the siphoning. So if it calls for a 1-inch headspace, I do my best to try to bring it to that 1-inch headspace within my powers. So if I had a little bit of water, I just add a little bit of water to it. Yep. Yeah, so inside the jar, we're creating a vacuum. We're actually driving all of the air out of the jar. That's why we use these two-piece lid systems. They actually push the air out of the jar. And so that proper headspace is because if you have a lot of air in the jar, then it's very difficult to push all of that air out and create a proper vacuum. You also want to pay attention. I probably don't need to hold on to that. Do I need to hold on to it? Is it bad? I feel like I've turned it. You also want to pay attention to headspace just because if it's over full, then you'll pop a top. So they also take into consideration, like, what does that food do when it boils? Tomatoes like to fizz. Tomatoes like to pop up. They're a lot lighter. They like to separate from the liquid. So sometimes tomatoes have a little bit more headspace than other foods. And every food is different. Yeah. No, it's because you did not have a proper seal. Yeah, somewhere that jar came unsealed. So if you go to pick up a jar out of your kitchen, if you go to pick up a jar out of your kitchen or out of your pantry, you should be lifting it by the jar lid to check its seal. Storing with these rings on, again, this may be a hill that you're willing to die on. You always are going to store them with the rings on. That's fine. But when you store with the rings on, it makes it more difficult. I don't need that. It makes it more difficult to tell if a lid has come unsealed. So when you go to pick up something and you open it and you're like, there's mold in here, at some point that jar has become unsealed. It either resealed itself or didn't. You had a question? Yeah.
Also, when you can, you always want to check the glass jars because if there's little nicks
Yeah.
in the top, you cannot get a seal on those. I have jars that are 3 years old.
Yeah.
They're
When-
still good, but some of them I have to not use.
So she's talking about the chips on the rings or the rims of the glass of the jar. And especially if you're buying things off like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, or you're getting grandma's old canning jars, you definitely want to be checking the glass rim of your jar. An easy way to do that is to take a cotton ball and just run that cotton ball under a little bit of water or even dry, and you just go like this on the outside of the ring. The cotton will stick to it. If there's any little nicks or cracks, the cotton will kind of pull away from the cotton ball, and that will tell you if your jar's cracked or nicked. Yeah.
Do you buy your spices that you use, like mustard seed in bulk, or
Do you want to answer this one?
they're expensive?
Yeah.
I always go, we have a local Mennonite Amish bulk food store. They actually sell Walnut Creek foods way up in Michigan. And I go there and I buy all my spices, and they come like this. And I buy them like this, and then I take my funnel and I put them in my small canning jars, and I set them on top of my thing in canning jars because I'm obsessed with canning jars anyway. And I have more canning jars than I have spice jars, so that makes perfect things. And then I take my old Parmesan cheese lids, you know, the green ones that have the pop-up on one side that you can really get a spoon in there, or they have a little holes on the other side. That's what I put on top of my jars when I use them for spices. Or my peanut butter lids will work too. Yes, I do. I do not use them, again, for...
What was the question? How do you get them off? So I do like several videos on this. It's called a church key. I don't know if that translates well to anybody. It's a very old like bottle top opener. There is like 100 different ways to get those lids off. Some people use butter knives, just their brute force with their thumbs. I'm a little bit more delicate. I need a bottle opener. So what I do is I put an old lid, I call it my junk lid. It lives in my junk drawer. I put my old lid on top of my new lid, the one that's canned and sealed to the jar. And then when I use that church key to pop it up, I damage the lid on the top, and the one on the bottom that is sealed on the jar stays intact. And then I can reuse my lids.
I take a common teaspoon that that you use it for cooking. I roll it up around. You see how the rim comes up as you go around? I go around until it's tight in there, and then I just go like that. and I just use a teaspoon.
Somebody had a question? I thought I heard something.
I do reuse them, but I prefer to reuse my lids for water bathing. I have used them for meat before, but the thing is, meat is pretty expensive. If I have one that for whatever reason, if I've nicked it or I've made it not as perfect as it was when I take it off, and I reuse it, then I've lost a jar with meat that I have, I'll have to eat that right away. My family may not have decided that they wanted beef carnitas tonight for dinner, but now they're getting beef carnitas for dinner because I didn't use the new lid. So I use them more for water bathing because if I have an extra jar of tomatoes, then tomorrow I'll just re-water bath it with the next load, or when I do another load, I can put it in the refrigerator. So I do it with things that are less costly as opposed to these days, I don't reuse them much for pressure canning. Not that I can't, it's a greater risk that the seal is going to fail, and I don't want to risk my $3 or $6 of meat as opposed to 50 cents of tomatoes.
The other thing when reusing your lids is know what to look for when you're reusing them. So you want to look for lids that are complete and free of rust or any discoloration to them at all. If you open a lid and the bottom of that lid has any type of oxidation on it or black spots or it looks like the paint has flecked, don't reuse those. And then you also want to check the actual seal of it. Does it still have a little bit of a sheen or a shine to it? That's good, right? Dull means it's been used a lot. A sheen or a shine. Is it soft to the touch? Or can you see the actual suction where the ring was on there? If it's soft to the touch and it bounces back, or you run it under some hot water and it's soft to the touch and it kind of bounces back, those are good things. So when reusing your lids, again, it's your kitchen and your rules, but you want to be looking for those things that are going to give you the best end product. You don't want to keep reusing lids if they're not, sealing for you, or if they're becoming unsealed later on. Yeah.
Opinions on like sugar ratios and jams. Like, somebody already asked that, or?
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Nope, that's okay. Do you want to take this one? You want me to take this one? Jams, jellies, if you want to use sugar ratios.
The sugar to acid is the ratio you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
So it's not the amount of sugar you're using, but you want to make sure that if you want it to set, you have to have the right sugar and acid ratio.
It's
Preservation.
You don't need sugar in it.
You don't need it.
Right. And the lemon juice or the acid is in there to preserve the color. So you don't have to put those in there at all. What they call a fruit conserve is just where you just cook that fruit down and down and down and down until you get to the thickness you want, and then you can it. So you don't have to, yeah. So what you really want to make is a conserve. So that's what,
Okay, and then if you're like lowering the sugar in a recipe because say you want to taste more strawberries or whatever, you're just changing the proportion to acid and lemon juice, and that will help it set better, or is it
right.
just-
So you can can just fruit and water and nothing else, but you need to raise the acidity of that if you're going to water bath can it. So by raising the acidity, we mean adding things like a lemon juice, vinegars will do that, stuff like that. That's more of a
or
pickling
powdered
thing, but
citric acid.
powdered citric acid, yeah. So if you're just going to do things in water, then you want to raise the acidity level of it. And a really good place to start is the Ball Blue Book. I know you guys have probably all heard of it at one time. Ball Blue Book. Ball Blue Book.
There's also some really good, I think for what you're asking, there's some really good guides that say, okay, this fruit has this much pectin, natural pectin, and you need to add this much acid to get that pectin to set up. So there's some guides that's not covered in the ball.
I feel like the ball jar recipe is always like you have to add 6 cups of sugar for safety reasons.
Right.
And it's only in there for taste.
And that's the thing is like, yeah, what if you want to taste more strawberry and less sugar?
Yeah.
That's my question. So in that case, are you saying that you would have to pressure can it, or
No, you just
No, you
need to
would
raise
never
the
pressure
acidity.
can it.
so you just essentially need to add acid?
Yep.
Okay. You said there's some information on it. Is there some books or? No.
I can't think of any.
There actually is, but it won't be out for a couple weeks. I'm actually an author of 2 books right now, and that's actually in the 3rd book. It's going to be called the collection of Rebel Canner recipes. But it's not out yet. I'm waiting for the cover art. It'll be out shortly. It'll be on my Facebook page, and it's also going to be sold on Amazon. You can get it as a Kindle ebook, or you can get a hardcover. But I actually include that chart in that book. Rebel Canners. It's the one with the black banner. There's several that are trying to copycat, but we're the ones with the black banner.
I'm going very slow on this canner because Tammy decided she was going to rocket stove it.
I can milk because I can buy, like, not recently in the last couple of years, but sometimes I've been able to get 99-cent gallons of milk, but they're not going to last me. But I can put those 99-cent gallons of milk, and I can make 9 or 10 pints that I can put on my shelf, and then when I go camping, I can pull it off. I don't have to put it in my cooler. You spill milk in your cooler, and then it's a little funky smelling for the rest of your life. So I don't have a cow, so I do store-bought milk. You can use, yes, but we talked about
goat's
earlier.
milk, oat
the
milk,
more,
any kind of milk.
The more, like store-bought whole milk isn't really whole milk. So like if you wanted a product that's like whole milk, you would use 2% store milk. When you can it, it's going to be more like store milk, more like whole milk. If you can milk fresh, it's going to be even more intense than whole milk. It's going to be more like a taste of a coffee creamer kind of thing. And you do want to make sure you skim all the cream off and go make butter with that, because it's going to be very rich because of caramelizing all the sugars. It's going to taste so much richer than it would as a raw milk product.
And I just want to say something in general about canning. Why can anything, right? So when we are talking about food security and food independence and really being able to be somewhat self-sustainable, there are all going to be things that we can't do. You can't raise a cow, and I can't have chickens, and you don't have a garden plot, and you don't have. So really, when we're talking about food security, canning is one method of a very broad spectrum of food preservation. And I always tell people, learn all the methods. Even if you are not interested in fermenting because you don't like the way it tastes, learn how to do it anyways. Because the more tools in your toolbox you have, the more security and independence you have, and less reliance on others. So canning, do we can a lot of stuff? Yes, in my house we can a lot. But we also have a freeze dryer, and we dehydrate and ferment and do all these other things. It's not our main source, but it's still a way that I make sure I have a backup plan to my backup plan. That way, if I have no electricity, or I can't can something, or I need a different preservation method, I have the knowledge to do it, and I've practiced it over the years, and I've gotten decent at it, and then that way, I have a lot of different backup plans. So canning is great for a lot of things, but if your end product is something you don't like, don't can it again. Find another way to preserve it. Freeze-dried milk, for example, is one of my favorites. Like, I will never buy powdered milk again from the store. I have a freeze dryer, but to freeze dry my own milk is a very long process, and it's kind of tricky. So I prefer just to buy my freeze-dried milk already done. It just makes more sense for me. So always find what makes sense for your budget, your lifestyle, and what you want your end product to be, and then just diversify that.
And I live far away from a grocery store, so if I suddenly decide that I want to make cookies at 10 o'clock at night, and I don't have any milk, well, we're out of luck, no cookies. But if I have a pint of milk on the shelf, I like it to cook with. I'm not going to drink it because unless I'm making hot chocolate or something, because the sugar's all caramelized in there and it tastes really sweet, and it doesn't taste like milk you just have got from the cow, or if you just got out of the grocery store. So I don't like it as well, even cold, but I do like having it there. I can take it camping. It's more transportable, and I can use it, and I have it right there off the shelf. I don't like the irradiated milk because I like the probiotics. I like, our body needs the nutrients, and when you irradiate something and you get those bags of milk or those boxes of milk, you've basically killed everything in it, and our bodies need those probiotics for our health. And so for me, canning is just a little bit better than buy an irradiated product to put on my shelf. I'm drinking milk that I canned 6 years ago. Everybody asks me that, and we've never canned so much that I've ever done it. So right now, I have some. I'm using one every year. I'm at the 6-year mark with that because somebody asked me that question 6 years ago.
And I think my family can tell right around the 1 year mark. Right around 1 year, I put that milk in the fridge. My family goes, "You canned that, didn't you?" Any other time, I can sneak it right past them. I just throw it in the milk jug that we normally use, and they can't tell. But right around that 1 year mark, they start to be able to tell. So again, milk is one of those funny things because people, texture-wise, how heavy the cream is in it. So it's kind of one of those things. You just have to try and see what you like for yourself. Once mine gets past around the 1 year mark, I start using it for baking. It goes in my baking stuff. So my canner has started its full steam here on the vent pipe. What's happening in the canner right now is it's pressing all the air out. It's filling up this chamber with steam. And so as you can see, I'm not going to burn myself. I know this looks scary if you've never canned before, but this is not scary. I'm not going to burn myself. I don't suggest putting your hand over it and holding it there, but again, it's not going to hurt anything. This is a full steam. I'm going to let that do that for 10 minutes. At the end of 10 minutes, we're going to put on the weight. What elevation am I at here? Does anybody know? Where am I at? Millersburg? Tammy, are we less than 1,000 feet?
You know, I didn't look it up, so I just winged it because I was only doing 5 anyway.
What I'm doing now, you can do on your smartphones. You're going to Google your zip code plus the word altitude, and that is going to tell you your altitude. And there's a reason why we do this. Millersburg, Ohio altitude. If anybody gets it faster than me, awesome. I don't have a great signal. Less than 1,000. Thank you. So at less than 1,000 feet, this chicken that I have in the jars, I'm going to can with a 10-pound weight. And the reason this is because the higher up in elevation you go, it changes how the pressure canner acts. It also changes your water bath canner. Anybody know why? What happens to water at higher elevations? Ah, right there. It's got a lower temperature. So water will boil differently at different elevations. And so we pay attention to elevations when we're doing all this sciencey stuff like canning because it will affect how those canners act. So the higher up you go, the more pressure you need to build up more steam and the more time that you need on a water bath canner. So with the pressure canner, it's more pressure. With the water bath canner, it's extra time. So that's why I needed to look it up. So we're less than 1,000 feet. I'm going to can at 10. But I have to wait until 10 minutes. Once you get this in the canner, I think we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and do the beef carnitas. Did I say that already? I may have. But we're going to let Tammy get her stuff in the jars here so she can show you how to water bath can the
And it is ready now. So
all right, and it's ready. Perfect timing.
let me get this.
I thought he was talking to me. I was like, oh, what?
All right. So I'm going to just use this. They were kind enough to put these hot pads down, but you won't have a hot pad like that at home. So I'm going to use my cutting board as my hot pad. Ooh, and I should use this. And
What can I get you? What can I help with?
I'm stealing yours. All right. Maybe I wish I could direct it so you could see it better. But you can see they're getting translucent now. They're not that bright spring green they were.
This is an amazing recipe, by the way. I know I'm gagging up here, but it's just the apple cider vinegar.
The
It's
vinegar
so
is
strong.
really, yeah. That's why I was having that coughing fit for
Do you
my.
want that? I don't know
Yeah.
if you want that. Yeah, it's really good. And tell them, how long should this sit? Tell them about the sweetness.
So the longer this sits, the more it's going to mellow, the better it's going to be. You should never, any pickle recipe or any pickling recipe, you should always wait 4 to 6 weeks before you ever open it to taste it. So if you can something and you're like, oh, I didn't like that. I made pickled beets for my nephew the other day, and he ate them right away, and he's like, oh, they're so strong, they taste so bad. I'm like, wait, you weren't even supposed to taste them. I just made them 2 days ago. You don't even taste them until it's been 4 to 6 weeks. So.
And that's kind of like that with pickling in general. If you open a jar of pickles the next day as opposed to 4 to 6 weeks later, you have a very different product.
Yeah.
Pickles will go softer over time, but they also absorb a lot of the brine, and so they become a lot more flavorful. So that's pretty, in general, in line with anything that you're pickling. Does anybody have pickling questions? I know a lot of times that's kind of a hot topic because a lot of people start off with pickling and water bath canning. No?
And then we talked about it earlier. Any food that you have that would catch a lot of air bubbles in there, you want to make sure that you go along the edge and you just kind of make sure that you've gotten all the air out. Otherwise, when you bring it out of the canner, you'll also think you've siphoned because the air has all gotten back up there and you'll have a lower water line. So I just like to go around the edge and kind of debubble it a little bit and make sure that I filled it to as much as I can. Because having a hard time finding jars, you want to make sure you're using every jar to the maximum capacity. And again, I'm just trying to make sure that I have a good ratio of jalapeno peppers to the brine. I probably will have leftover brine. With this recipe, it's pretty normal. And that's okay because, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and can the brine as well. And then I'm just going to use that as a marinade on my next roast.
I like to do mine in half pints. There are some things that I give away a lot for like gifts. Or if you come to my house, you don't leave without food. That's kind of the general rule of thumb. So when a guy comes to fix my sink, he goes home with jars. But I like the half pints of these because they make really great gifts. Yeah. Smaller, you know. I don't feel so sad when those jars don't come back.
I did too much. And sometimes you get them a little too full because you're looking down at them and not across. And just take a few out and put it in the next one. Over there.
Do you want me to start wiping and
yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
That'll move it along a little bit. Everything's better in the kitchen when you have company.
No. Is there another
Canning
towel?
used to be a very social activity.
Yeah.
And I think we've gotten the idea now that it's a solitary activity, and it's not. I did debubble those. We only have one more jar here. Let's see.
These are very sugary, so I usually wipe the rims with some vinegar.
Yeah.
Something keeps dinging and I don't know what it is. Oh yeah, my timer. Good call. Yeah. So now I'm gonna put my 10-pound weight on. And I'm very unfamiliar with this stove, so you can see I brought it up kind of slow. Like if I were at my house, I'd kind of crank that up, but we don't need any surprises or oopsies. So I'm gonna put the 10-pound weight on. It's funny, a lot of times people in my comment sections will say, there is no way that weight weighs 10 pounds. No, it doesn't weigh 10 pounds. It creates 10 pounds of pressure or 10 psi. And so the way that these little weights are made, I'm sure you guys, some of you know this, there's little holes on here and that's what the vent pipe goes in. These are graduated in size, meaning they are, when they're hollowed out specifically to create those pounds of pressure. So when you look at down into these holes, they will look different on how the vent pipe sits on there and allows the steam to come out. I don't have my glasses on, but that looks like 10. Yeah, that's a 10. And so now very slowly, hopefully, the stove plays nice. We come up slowly to pressure. Things that are normal, do you hear the clunk in there? Clunk. I started with a cold product. So I started with cold chicken, cold jars, cold everything. And so it takes a little longer to come up. And that clunking is sometimes these things, the shelves, they're a very thin metal. And sometimes they clunk around in there, and sometimes you can hear the jars kind of hit each other in there. All kind of normal sounds that come from this machine. You'll also start to see my vent pipe will leak a little bit of water as it's coming up to pressure right around the vent, and that can sometimes drip down, it can evaporate, it can make it appear that you're losing steam. Pay attention, if it's coming from this area, it's not the lid itself. You've got a good seal on the lid. It's just coming from this area. That's also very normal. Double stacking jars. That's another thing that you can do inside of the 921s and larger. You can double stack your pint jars. And when you double stack, you'll hear even more noises sometimes.
Oops, sorry.
And I don't know if you guys know this, but the canners double as water bath canners. All right, do you want your finger tight or my finger tight?
Our finger tight, it's fine.
Oh, we have an hour finger tight now.
Finger tight.
I have arrived.
Yes.
Okay.
I like to clean as I go. So while
And I'm chaotic, so
while
that's why we got two separate tables.
So while I'm water bath canning in there, I'll be doing my dishes at home. So when I get done, I'm done. I don't like to be done and then have a lot of work to do to clean up after my done. I like my done to be done.
I would love that, but my brain just doesn't work that way.
In 4 to 6 weeks, they're going to be really yummy. And Sarah's keeping me straight here. She's handing me the jar lifter, and I put my very hot syrupy liquid.
You want a refill?
Yeah, because I boiled away too much water.
She boiled all the water out of the pot. You can't see in there.
Yeah.
There's a little bit. Let me get you a refill.
Here, take, oh, you got water? Oh, perfect.
Well-
Or we could take hot water out of there and put it in the gallon jug to move it.
Okay.
So you can't see in here, but they're not even halfway up the jars. And when you water bath can, you want an inch above the jar. Okay? When you steam can, they use a little bit of water and a lot of steam. But when you're water bath canning, you use a lot of water.
So I have an interesting thing happening here. One of the scanners that they gave me, the dial gauge, looks like, I'm sorry, I
You're
got
good.
so
No, you
distracted.
go do that. You do you.
The dial gauge looks like it's slightly bent. So my needle looks like it's not going to go up. So I'm not going to panic. I'm just going to have to listen for my weight. I'm not going to be able to rely on this dial gauge. And that's okay. Do you ever get in a rental car and it almost catch on fire? Well, I did this morning. Literally, I left it on the side of the road. They had to come get me. But it's kind of like that. When you get in a rental car and you're like checking out where are the flashlights, where are the brights, where are the... That's kind of how your canners are. You really need to be like, if you're using somebody else's canner, you need to pay attention to the working parts of the canner.
No, because it's cold. I want hot.
My dial gauge is at 0 right now. So I clearly do not have a dial gauge that is working, but I've reached 10 pounds of pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer for 75 minutes for pints, 90 minutes for quarts. I'm going to give that guy over there a lot of flack later. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn this down as far as I can get it until I can regulate the pressure. Now, on these all-American canners, they're different than the Prestos. So if you have a Presto, your weight will need to be a constant jiggle. It's a real light rocking. But with these, it's about every 30 seconds to a minute, minute and a half, and it only needs to just do a light jiggle. So these are much more self-regulating, which is really cool. They don't have to jiggle all the time. I like where it's at. I feel like it's going to play nice. I'm going to start the timer. Stop, collaborate, and listen.
One more.
All right, 1 hour, 15 minutes for my pints. Start. And now at this point in your canning, when you get the pressure canner started, you seem like you've got it regulated. The thing you don't want to do is now go outside and take care of the horses, right? You do want to be within an earshot of this. You do want to be paying attention to this. You don't want to walk away from this and be what I call willfully negligent. Okay, this is still a working piece of machinery that you need to keep an eye on. Do you have to babysit it and stand in front of the dial gauge the whole time? No, you don't have to do that. But you should keep an ear out, make sure that it's still going, it's still jiggling the way it's supposed to.
And you're going to find when you get more experience, your stove has a sweet spot.
Yeah.
You're going to find you know where you have to set your stove, and it's going to be like that same spot every time.
Okay, so it is 2:47. I am going to take just a 15-minute break. I'll be back at like 3 o'clock, just shortly after, and I'm going to start canning the beef carnitas.
When we come, I'm going to take a break with you.
Okay.
And when we come back, I will be taking the milk out of the canner, and our cowboy candy will be done.
So, thank you guys so much. If you're not coming back and you're going to some other tents, thank you guys so much for being here. And this has been an amazing event for us. There's so many great companies here sponsoring all kinds of just wonderful things. So you guys exchange telephone numbers, keep it in the community, help each other out, and thank you guys for having us if you're not coming back. Okay? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and keep going with the canning extravaganza. If you were here for the first part of this, Tammy canned up some milk for us and some jalapeno candy, otherwise known as cowboy candy. And I did some chicken, which is still in the pot. It's got like 35 minutes to go. And then I'm going to show you my carnita recipe. So Tammy's going to go ahead and take this away and show you what the milk looks like.
All right. So on the milk, we brought it right up to pressure, turned it off, and then you sit it until you can touch it. This is still too hot, but we don't have another day to wait. Or
We don't have the luxury of time.
So yeah, wait until you can touch it, and it is room temperature on the outside. Totally sealed. You don't take this off. You don't undo it like I did to make it easier for right now. So once it's completely cool on the outside, and this is still hot, you can go ahead and take that off, and then you can go ahead and unscrew it.
I gave you the nice ball grabber.
And
jar
because
grabber.
I rushed it, you can see the jars are a little white on the outside. So I did have a little siphoning because I rushed it because I wanted you guys to see it. But there's the milk. And once they're completely cool, I'm going to wipe them off. I'm going to take the rings off. Yes, I'm a rebel, but yes, I remove my rings. I only leave them on when I'm moving it. And once I'm not moving it, I take it off. You want to make sure that you get wiped when you're wiping the jars off, that you take these off and you're wiping everything, like we said earlier. Stealing this one. When they stamp any lid, the circle out to make the lid, this part right here doesn't have coating, so that's where you're going to get rust. If you leave your ring on and you don't wipe underneath there and get all that moisture underneath there off, or if you store them with this on, you're going to get moisture condensation because this metal and this metal are different, and you're going to get a reaction there. So and you're going to get rust. So take these off. So this is the milk. And like I said, I can see it on here, and that's only because I rushed it and I got siphoning, all those things we told you not to do. We did today, so that we can show you the milk when it comes out.
In the interest of showing you everything.
Just for educational purposes. If you had this, you know you rushed it. Next time, don't rush it. And then you just let them set like you would for 24 hours. Test your seal. Anything that hasn't sealed at the 24-hour mark goes in the refrigerator. Wipe them off and put them in your shelf, in your pantry. Yes.
Okay, I'm curious because I thought canning did not can anything with milk in it.
Yeah.
You can can milk by itself.
That's
Okay.
by the book. I'm a rebel canner. Okay? You kind of missed the introduction to it. Mr. Borden, he decided that he wanted to transport milk by train all across the United States 30 years before the USDA was created. They've never tested milk because it was already in use, in process, being canned and shipped all over the United States for 30 years before they were ever created as an organization. And for the first 20 years, they were only interested in meat packing and putting that little blue stamp on your steak that you get, and you go, why did they put this that looks like this blue shield on my steak? That's all they were interested in was meat packing. So they don't always test things, especially things there's no money in it for them to test milk. So they will never test milk. So if Mr. Borden's company can do it 90 years, 190 years later, I can can it in my house. And I'm using my kitchen, my rules for that. I can't hear.
How do you not wait? Okay, so basically what she's asking, I think, is how do you do it correctly and not have the siphoning, right?
I would have let that that canner was still hot. I would have let that come completely cold before I pull that off for the milk. For the milk, you want it completely cold. If it takes all day, if it takes till the next day for that canner to be cool to the touch, room temperature, just let it set. Then you open it up, then you take it out. Just milk. Just milk. Like I said, milk is its own kind of special product. It breaks a lot of the rules. It's a little different.
I just wanted to chime in too. She's got a question though. Go ahead. Tammy says no.
Somebody asked me
I-
that question 6 years ago.
Yeah.
I opened one this year, and we drank it. Right now, I can say that my milk has lasted 6 years. I have 2 more in that test batch. The most I'll is 8 years, but I usually do a 2-year rotation on anything I can. A lot of plants are biennial, like your gardeners, you're going to get a real bumper crop 1 year, and the next year you're not going to get any production. So I can on those bumper years, I want a 2-year supply that'll last 2 years so that I'm prepared for that bad harvest year. I live in Michigan, we get frost. If we get frost on our apple trees, that bumper crop year, I won't get a crop that year either. So it might be 3 years before I get another harvest. So I always make sure that I have 2 years ahead in my pantry. So I'm rotating everything and making sure that I'm using the oldest first, and I'm trying to plan for a 2-year supply. That's my rule for what I want. I'm going to come to you.
I think we have a Headspace question.
Not that far.
She has a canning question we can't hear. Spices.
Yes. That's a lot of times if it's boiling over, that's a siphoning problem. Either you're using too high a heat on your stove, you need to back it down to keep, you want to keep it at pressure, but you want to use the minimum heat to keep it at that pressure. So you got to find that sweet spot. If your burner is about to go out, sometimes you'll find that one can in there is not doing as well as the others, and it'll like boil over, but the rest isn't, because you might have a hot spot on that burner, so you might need to check your burner. And again, Sarah did, how'd you call it, the 30 rule?
The 10-10-10 rule.
Go ahead, Sarah.
To cut down on siphoning, I use something called the 10-10-10 rule, which means when my canner is done and I turn off the heat and it goes down to 0, I wait 10 minutes after it's gone down to 0 before taking off the weight. And then after my weight is off, I wait 10 more minutes before unlocking the lid. And then I wait 10 more minutes, that last 10 minutes, to take the lid off and the jar's out. And what I'm doing is I'm allowing the canner to cool at a more controlled rate than just pulling off the weight, pulling off the lid, pulling out the jars. I'm pulling out jars that are extremely, extremely hot into the ambient temperature. And a lot of times that is exactly the moment that you start getting that siphoning. So by slowing that down and really controlling that, you're going to have less siphoning.
And unfortunately with the milk, I wanted to show you taking the gauge off. I wanted to show you untightening them. So I couldn't do that slow thing. And in order to show it to you today, I couldn't do it. So you can see, like that one, I got a lot of siphoning. I got a lot of milk overflow and over bubbling. Mm-hmm. There is no time for the milk. Milk is an exception to all the rules. You bring it up to 5 pounds of pressure, and as soon as it's at 5 pounds of pressure, you turn it off. And then you don't touch the canner until it's cool room temperature, which is why I got it like this, because I didn't do that. Because I couldn't show you that, or we'd all be waiting for tomorrow.
And I think one thing too is people want to know, how long does it last in a jar? I get that question all the time. How long does it actually last in the jar? And the short answer is, what is your environment? So that is going to depend on how long it lasts in the jar. Also, your end product at 6 months is going to be different than your end product at 25 years. At 25 years, if that jar is still sealed, you've created that hermetic environment, but there's no microbes in there. Nothing is going to physically hurt you to eat that food. But it's not going to be the best consistency, right? It's going to look probably pretty ugly. It's not going to be the best consistency. And so you want to eat your food in a 1 to 3 year rotation, or Tammy does like 1 to 2 years rotation. You really want to be using what you can and canning what you use. We're not putting food on the shelves just to let it sit and look pretty, although it does. And I like to go sit in my pantry and stare at my jars. But you do want to be eating those things. You also want to be taking notes. How did you feel about those green beans at that 2 year mark? Was it something that you really liked, or was it not? Maybe you put that in your notebook. Hey, let's try to eat these green beans within a 1 year. Or maybe I need more, maybe I need less. So you really want to be eating and product testing your end products. You can use any kind of milks you want. You could use goat's milk, cow's milk, store-bought milk, basically any milks you want. The milk will get thicker and sweeter. So if you start with a 1% milk, your end product is going to be like 2. If you start with 2% milk, it's going to be more like whole milk. It is common for the milk to turn a slight pinkish color or a tan color because of the sugars, and your end product will be slightly thicker and sweeter than what you started with.
If I start with whole milk, do I get chocolate milk in the end?
No. Only if you put a little cocoa syrup in with it.
Yeah, you'll get something a little bit more like a coffee creamer or a condensed, kind of milk. Okay, I'm going to go into the beef carnitas. So this recipe can be found on my blog. My name is up there on the sign-in sheet right here. It says Peelies and Petals. I know I can say Peelies and Petals, and you're going to be like, I don't know how to spell that or what it is. It's up there. This is on my recipe blog. This is one of, I think, my more popular recipes with people. You can use any type of meat for this you want. You can make chicken carnitas, beef carnitas, pork. I'm sure I'm missing something. Any of the meats. So what I have here is a cow that was graciously culled yesterday for us and butchered. So this is extremely fresh meat, and I've just cut it into chunks. Now you can make this in pints or in quarts. I'm going to do pints today, and this is so simple. I think that's what I like most about this. So we're going to put the meat in the jar. Nice and easy. I'm just using a funnel to kind of keep the rims from getting too much. I'm not going to pack it too much down because I'm going to be adding some different liquids to this and spices. This will also make its own juice, which is fantastic. When I open these jars, I put them in the blender with some chili peppers. I reduce that down, and then we dip our tortillas in it when we're eating the carnitas. But it's also just great just straight out of the jar. This is a pressure canning recipe because we're using meat and it's a low acid food. We like to pressure can this. That is another question I get asked a lot. Can I water bath canned meats? You can absolutely do anything you want to, right? It's your kitchen, it's your rules, and there are a lot of communities and a lot of cultures that water bath can everything. But before you venture down that road, I would say do your research, make sure you understand how to do it safely. It is a different technique. It does take a very long time. It takes a lot of babysitting, meaning you have to really sit by your jars and make sure that the water levels remain consistent, that the boiling level remains consistent. It is not something that I am too terribly comfortable with, so it is generally not something I teach. I never shun people for how they preserve their food. I think to each person their own, but you always, in every endeavor, want to be as educated as possible going into it, right? Because we don't want to make anybody sick. All right, so we're going to call that, oh, that one looks a little light. We're going to call that good. Okay, now we're going to call it good. And now we're going to get to the spices. Now, the interesting thing about spices when you're pressure canning is they tend to intensify under pressure. So, if you are canning a recipe for the first time, say you've got this killer chili recipe and you love this chili, it's your favorite chili, and you go to can it, you may open that chili and be like, this is not my chili, okay? That's because the seasonings intensify under pressure. Basically, when you are pressure canning something in a jar, you are pressure cooking it inside this jar. That's what's happening. You're turning this entire jar into a little tiny mini pressure cooker. And so because of that, everything kind of intensifies. If you're trying a new recipe or a recipe that you really like, start light on your spices just to start, to make sure that you like the end product. So I'm going to start with half a teaspoon of Don't Lose Your Skirt. It was a bad day for this outfit choice, by the way. Okay, half a teaspoon of cumin and oregano. So we're going to add these directly to the jars, just on top of the meat, a half a teaspoon of each. And I have played with this recipe over the years, and this is how I like my seasonings. If I'm doing this in quart jars, you would simply just double that. So half a teaspoon of oregano and half a teaspoon of cumin. And the next thing we're going to add is salt, which is another question that comes up quite a bit. Do I have to add salt to it? You absolutely do not in pressure canning. Yes, salt is a preservative. When we talk food preservation, it is a preservative, but it is not necessary in pressure canning. So if you have salt restriction diet, this is not needed. It's only just for taste. What kind of salt, Sarah? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. If you like pink Himalayan salt, use pink Himalayan. If you're doing something like pickling, then your salt, if it has an iodine in it, it will come out a little bit cloudy. It still will not change the food itself or the safety of the food itself. Salt is salt, but your brine may get a little bit cloudy, and sometimes that is unappeasing to people. So that's why they try to sell you canning salt at really, really expensive prices. 1/4 teaspoon of each of garlic pepper, that's not a thing, garlic powder, and onion powder. And if you want to do this in quarts, go ahead and double it. Also, another thing with spices and canning, if you are pressure canning, try to stay away from sage. Take my word for it. I mean, you can certainly try it if you want to, but I ruined about 50 pounds of sausage quite a while ago now. But sage turns very, very bitter under pressure. Very bitter. So if you have a recipe that calls for sage, my suggestion is to leave it out and then add it when you open the jar. It's the safest thing to do, and then you don't have to worry about your food going bitter. All right, so again, just for a recap, for our spices, it was 1/2 teaspoon of each cumin, oregano, and salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of each of onion and garlic powder. Now we're going to add lime juice. That's going to be 1/2 teaspoon. You don't have to use lime juice, but to me, the lime juice and the orange concentrate that I'm going to use here is what gives it that carnita flavor. Did you have a question? Oh, fixing your hat. Saw you out of the corner of my eye.
Is it still a teaspoon of lemon?
Say it again, is it a teaspoon? I have 1/2 teaspoon here of lime. Yeah, I'm using lime juice, sorry. This is the lime juice from concentrate, 1/2 teaspoon. And then the orange juice that I'm using is the frozen kind. You know, these frozen tubes that you can get? This is a more concentrated form of orange juice, and it only takes 1/2 teaspoon of this as well. So usually when I'm done with this, then I just use the rest of this to make orange juice. Or you can reconstitute this with water, throw it in some jars, and can it and have orange juice on your shelves.
You can can it concentrated too.
Yes, you
Then
can.
you save your space.
Yeah, except, yeah, we're kind of lazy, so we like it done already. So we just drink it out of the jar.
Jars
All right.
and space in my pantry are a premium.
Right. 1/2 teaspoon of each lime and orange juice concentrate. And then the last thing that goes on top is 1 bay leaf. All right, now that's it. You can add boiling hot water to this or beef broth if you like. I like it in its concentrated form because it does make its own juice inside the jar as it's cooking, and I like that broth juice to be really flavorful, so I leave it. All right. I probably could have packed a little bit more meat in those jars, but that's all right. Save some for later. The next thing I'm going to do is just wipe the rims of my jar. You don't have to use white vinegar. This is what I prefer to use. White vinegar and animal fat work really well together because they don't like each other. So if at any time during my canning process, some of the liquid siphons out or gets up near the rims of the jar, the vinegar actually acts like a little bit of a repellent and kind of repels that back down. It's kind of like when you have a bay leaf that won't go in the jar. It's kind of like when you have water and vinegar. vinegar and oil. Those two things don't like to mix. They repel each other. Same concept here. Are you guys all enjoying this? Has anybody made it to the cheese making thing? I haven't either. I want to go to the cheese making. Oh, okay. Yeah, the wind is really messing with us too. I've only almost caught the tent on fire twice. Twice. I think that's a successful day.
Technically, we were on fire. There was flame.
Nobody needed to know that part. Okay.
Nobody noticed though. They all sat here and nobody noticed. I just go over and I take the fire and I throw it in the sink and I put it out and nobody noticed. It was all right.
Yeah, if I can get a request for tomorrow, it's a fire extinguisher. All right, so I did this morning, but I'm going to show you guys too in case you weren't here. I am using these Superb Industry canning lids. These have by far, and I think Tammy feels the same way, they have knocked it out of the park with these. This is a better product than we've had in a really long time. So with these lids, you really don't want to over tighten them. The suction power on them is incredible, but if you over tighten your rings, they're going to buckle. So you don't want to do that. So I'm going to show you what I was taught is finger tight. Tammy and I were under a little experiment this morning, and we clearly have a different definition of finger tight, but that's okay.
I did not know my fingers were that muscular.
Strong like bull. So I've cleaned the rim. I have the ring. This is what I was taught. Again, am I totally 100% correct? I don't know, but this is what works. This is 3 fingers on the rim that goes on the jar. I'm going to hold it in the air so you can see what I'm doing, and then I'm going to show you on the table here. You put this on, and then you screw it down until the lid ring engages with the jar. So once that starts to engage, the jar will start to spin. That's it. That's finger tight. You should not be grabbing these with 2 hands and doing this. That is way, way too tight. And you want to try to do it all in one motion. So 3 fingers, just until it engages, and then it spins. And if it's on your table, it's much more noticeable that it does it. When it starts to spin, 3 fingers, and the jar will start to spin. That's it. That's all finger tight is. The reason for that is we're using a 2-piece lid system. So inside of these jars, we need to press the air out. We're trying to create a hermetic seal, meaning no air in the jars. In order for that to happen, these rings and these lids need to be somewhat separate. We need to give them space to push all of the air out. If we crank these down and we create a seal inside that jar that doesn't allow that to come out, these are going to pop. They're either going to buckle or a ring's going to pop off. You're going to have a bunch of food in the bottom of your canner. Does it happen sometimes? Yeah, it does. It does. If you've never busted a jar in your canner, you have not been christened yet. And that's it. So I would put that in this canner, or maybe Tammy could let me borrow hers.
It's done. Yeah, use it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great.
I dumped the water out. I probably should have left the hot water in there.
Oh, that's okay.
Here.
I'm just going to show everybody a little bit about the canner and what it's going to look like. I'm obviously not going to ask you to sit here for 75 minutes while we process these. So at the end of this, we'll be answering any questions you guys have. This canner is the All-American 921. Who in here pressure cans? Yeah, lots of you. Okay, great. Anybody with a 921 or an All-American? Just bought it? Woo-hoo! A couple of you have them. Look, John over there. So with the 921 for this specific model, you want 2 to 3 inches of water in the bottom. That's this model. The larger the canner gets, the more water you're going to need, and your manual will tell you the specific amount of water that canner needs. If you were unsure, I think I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Want the lid.
If you were unsure about that, you can get a kitchen ruler. That's what I have, because sometimes depth perception in water is a little bit off, so I'll stick the ruler down there. Now that my canners are also seasoned, there's a ring. So I know where the water line is. So 3 inches of water. This is controversial, but little bit of vinegar in there. I help that it finds my jars to keep from getting cloudy from any kind of water residue. And I don't like cleaning jars more than I have to. So I put a little splash of vinegar in mine. We're on well water. It's pretty hard. That just helps keep everything kind of clean. So these canners have the ability to double stack. This size and the size larger than this, you can double stack. And to do that, your canner comes with a second shelf. You would put this shelf on top of the jars, and then you would fill the second level with jars as well. Important to note here, that does not change the water level in the canner. Yeah, it does not change the water level. So this canner operates by creating steam. The water level is pre-described for the amount of steam that this thing needs to make. So this is not water bath canning. In water bath canning, we need to submerge the jars. Like Tammy's going to
I pulled them out.
you pulled them out already. Tammy's going to show you. She did her her jalapenos here. Those jars were completely submerged in water 1 to 2 inches. But you don't need to add extra water to this. We're creating steam. We're not water bath canning. So that's how that would go.
You want that much water.
Yeah, over the top. Yeah.
When you put the 3 inches, and then as you set your jar
Yeah.
in,
The water level rises. Yep.
above the
That's okay.
ring. Is that okay?
Yep, that's okay. If you're canning with smaller jars, especially like the half pint jars, or if you're doing like salmon or something in the little quarter pint jars, they're going to sink in the water. That's okay. The water level remains the same no matter what. So that's just an easy thing to remember. I don't care what I'm putting in here, my water level is going to remain the same. Now, if you are doing smaller jars and the water level comes all the way up over the top of them and they start to float and move around, you can always add that second shelf on with some extra jars of water to hold them down. Yes, ma'am.
So, I learned that if you have not enough jars to the home space,
Yeah.
add a jar of water,
Correct.
right? So
Yep.
they don't move around. So do you have to put, I mean, of course, have to water in, but you have to put the lid and do the whole thing?
Yeah, so I don't know what your answer on this is, but mine might be different.
Well,
I want emergency drinking water.
yeah. I'm
Same.
going to do it because I'm going to take that jar of water and I'm going to put it in my pantry.
Yes.
And now I have a jar of sterile water. If I need, Sarah and I are
We can a
OR
lot the
people.
same,
Well, we
yeah.
used to work in an operating room. Sterile water is what you use to irrigate wounds. So I have a 14-year-old who is accident prone. So he still comes crying, I know I've got some good water. I can irrigate his cut, see if he's going to need to go to the emergency room for stitches or not or whatever. So I have that for that. I have it for emergency drinking water then. And, it takes as much space to store this jar empty on my shelf as it does to store this jar with water on it. That jar of water is perfectly clean and ready to open up and use when I'm canning.
Like wasting
Yeah.
the lid, right?
Yeah.
You just open and dump the water, it makes no sense.
Yeah, we have the privilege of living in America where we don't have to worry about water shortages and stuff like that.
Well,
but I feel like it's
sometimes.
my responsibility. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not that far from Flint, okay? But
Yeah.
I feel like it's my responsibility not to be wasteful, that God has given us this abundance. So I try to use every bit of it I can. So I might even take that water and dump it in my canner as part of my canning water.
Okay, so the reuse the lid question.
Are you asking the Rebel canner? Because my answer might be different.
Your manufacturer will tell you no. Yes. So there's certain things you want to really be paying attention to though if you're reusing lids. You want to make sure they're not damaged or dented in any way. They don't have any rust on them. The underside of the lid still is slightly shiny, that the rubber is pliable and still has flex to it. If it doesn't meet all that criteria, I would not take the chance of wasting my food. But yes, I reuse lids hundreds of times. I will tell you, these have been doing really well. Superb's not listening. They do really well. So, I forget it's live broadcast and I'm probably recorded. Okay. Yeah. Did I cut you off on something else?
Nope, that was
okay,
it.
so I do the same thing with the water. I like extra emergency drinking water on my shelves, or sometimes I will throw in a non-iodized salt into mine with a washcloth. And then I have a wound cleaning jar. If anybody gets hurt, we pull that out. You know, I put it in the canner with the rest of everything else. I use the non-iodine salt in the event of somebody gets hurt on my property that has a shellfish allergy and cannot be near iodine.
Like
So, do you really? Well, I got
yeah.
you covered.
You got
See?
me covered.
I
Yeah.
knew it would
Yeah.
be somebody.
That's why I'm like, when I ask from like, make sure we have I use the pink Himalayan sea
Yeah.
salt because I still want the minerals, but I can't have anything iodized. And I just don't want to take a chance using even the non-iodine salt because it's manufactured in the same plant, and I'm that allergic to table salt even.
Okay. Don't come over here. I have table salt over here. Okay. So, I hope that answered your question. Okay. On to canning. The magic of this canning, everything happens in this lid. So this part is great, right? But it's just a giant pot. You can actually water bath can in these as well. So when you do buy a pressure canner, you can leave that on your stove basically all the time with the water in it and just switch out the water as needed. You can water bath can in these as well. This lid is though where all the magic happens. So when you get a new canner or anytime you're going to use your canner, the first thing you should do is inspect its working parts. You should look down the vent pipe and make sure that you can see the sunlight. If you're not afraid of germs, I'm not going to do this because I'm going to let the guys over there eat this. You can put your mouth on that vent pipe and blow and make sure the air goes through. If at any time it becomes blocked, you can take a paper clip and open it up and run it down there and just clean it out. The other magic to this is obviously the gauge and the weight. So those two things kind of work in tandem to let you know what's going on inside your canner. The gauge itself is a visual representation of what's happening on the inside of the canner. And then the weight is going to be your audible noise. That's going to let you know that you've achieved pressure. And this is the weight. This is the weight for this one. Every canner is slightly different. This is an all-in-one, so you have your 5, your 10, and your 15-pound weight all in one. I really like that because sometimes I lose pieces to things, so I always get an extra one of those. There's a little arrow on here and an arrow on here. You line those two things up, and then when you turn it, it has these bayonet fingers that lock underneath, right there and right there, that lock underneath this canner. So just like so. Now when you're using this on your stove, you really want to have the overpressurized plug facing the back of your stove. That way, if at any time the canner has too much pressure and it pops out and it blows out, it's not blowing directly at anybody that could be standing in front of the stove. That's another kind of fail-safe mechanism that these canners have to keep, people get afraid that they're gonna go boom. If they go boom, it's because you were willfully negligent and you walked away from the canner with it completely on high and decided to go to the movies, okay? You really have to mess that up. That's my timer telling me to turn off the chicken. Yay! Yay! Okay, I saw a question. Yep. Yes, the very first time you get your canner, you should use some oil on the rim. The manuals do tell you which ones are acceptable. Most of the time, I just use a little dab of olive oil, and then you should re-oil them. Yeah,
that's what we use today.
You should re-oil them when either they start to look dry, your lid starts to get not easy to move around, or it gets stuck. You should re-oil it, or every like 10 to 15 cycles, just whichever comes first. The wing nuts, I bring those up in opposite directions of each other, like so. And then what I'm going to do is the extra little step of getting kind of on the canner's level. You can already tell I'm a little uneven. And what we're looking for is an even seal between the canner lid and the canner itself. 9 times out of 10, when somebody says that their canner ran dry, meaning steam escaped somewhere, it's because they had this lid on slightly cattywampus. and steam was escaping from one side of it. So I always just kind of get down on eye level a little bit, and I check out the seal on both sides all the way around and make sure that they're even. If I have one side a little higher than the other, like this one is horribly off right now, I loosen that side and then tight down the other. So that brings it back into level again. This does not have to be perfect, but it should be, you know, it should look good. It should look good on both sides. All right, that's good. We got about a 1/2 inch seal all the way around. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to take some questions. I'm going to pull this canner off and then get this one on so I can start venting it. Yes? This was English, what did they call it? English roast. It was beef. Yeah, it was just these big chuck steaks, and I just cubed them up. But you could use chicken, you could use pork. The nice thing about pressure canning, if you've never pressure canned, you can use cheap cuts of meat. They're very, very tender. It tenderizes it. So when you find those big like pork butts for 49 cents a pound or 99 cents a pound, buy them, get them, because it's the most delicious tender meat ever. And that's one of the benefits of it. You can save money by buying cheaper cuts of meat. Did you steal my towel again? Nope.
I did, but I put it back.
Okay. Now this is under pressure. This is not something I recommend doing. Moving these when they're under pressure, as All American sits in the audience going, don't you dare, don't you dare. Don't do this at home. Leave it on your stove. I'm just doing this so I can get this one on and we can start teaching. Or showing you how it works. One of the things you never want to do with your canners is pull that weight off when they're under pressure. I've seen people do that. It's called quick release. I know there are certain instances when we do this, for example, in like pressure cooking, but in pressure canning, you're really putting your jars under a tremendous amount of stress if you do that. You're probably going to get siphoning, and you're probably not going to get a good seal on your lids. So you really want, there is nothing fast about canning. Everything needs to be kind of done in its own time. And if you're like me, you start at midnight and you're not done until 3 o'clock in the morning. All right. I'm good. What's that? It's on my blog. Yep, it's on my blog, and my name is up here on the board. So that's probably the easiest way to search me is if you just Google Peelies and Petals. It's going to come up with all the news articles, all the blog stuff, all the TikTok stuff. Yeah, it'll all be there. Yeah.
Did you take the weight off when the pressure gauge was 0? Is that how you know when to take off the weight?
Yes. So when your pressure gauge goes down to 0, you can take the weight off. And then I use what's called the 10-10 rule. I feel like I've said this already to this group. Did I? I did. Don't let me repeat myself. Not you. 10 minutes I take it off, 10 minutes I wait, 10 minutes I unlock the lid, 10 minutes I take out the jars. I let them space 10 minutes in between to help bring the temperature down more controlled. You're welcome.
Because you don't want to have any thermal shock to the glass.
Yeah.
You know, it is designed to do these high temperatures. It's not designed to have a cold draft come through. And, you know, that's just the nature of glass. You know.
And
Yeah.
speaking of thermal shock, when you are doing these recipes, you saw I started with cold beef. It was raw. I didn't cook it. And so therefore, I'm not going to heat my jars. I'm not going to heat my water. Everything needs to be the same temperature. If you're using hot things, like Tammy did her jalapenos over here and they were hot water, hot jars. You make sure that all those temperatures match so you're not thermal shocking the glass. Yes? So right now, I have to bring it up to steam. So we haven't even begun steaming yet. This has to get hot. It has to fill with steam. Once we get steam, it will start to come out of this vent pipe. That's called venting. And it's the good kind. We like this kind of venting in the kitchen. So once that starts venting, I time it for 10 minutes. And during that 10-minute time, the steam rises, pushing all the air out of the canner and filling it with steam. At the end of that 10 minutes, weight goes on. Yep. There was something else I was going to say. Escapes me. Yeah.
When I do meat, I learned that you can like sear your meat first,
Yeah.
right? You fry a little bit just to. Do you notice any difference by just putting?
You want
it-
to take this one?
It'll help you keep the juices in more. So you do that to help keep it in. One thing Sarah and I do differently, I always put water in my jar, even when I raw pack, because I'm a gravy person.
She likes her juice.
I want the juice to stay in the meat. I want the juice in the jar to make broth. And then I'm going to open that up and I'm going to make gravy. Even if I don't use it with that meal, I might use that gravy on potatoes for another side dish tomorrow. So I always want that water in there. So that's something we just, and it's, you'll learn, it's a personal preference.
Yeah.
There's no one right way. All three ways are right.
Start keeping a canning journal. That's what I tell everybody. Keep a canning journal. You're not going to remember from one season to the next. Yep. Yes. Yeah, all the meats make their own broth, but if you add a little bit of water to start, you'll have more broth at the end. The broth that for my chicken, I usually end up with about half a cup, probably. For a pint-sized jar and a quart, I end up with about a cup. And it depends on the meat, too.
So do you only fill about halfway of water?
I always do the whole way because I just said I really like gravy, and I want about a cup and a half to make a good gravy out of a pint, so that if I'm serving this with mashed potatoes, I have enough to make the gravy for my mashed potatoes. It's just I'm a meat.
It's a preference.
We were raised on meat and potatoes in my home, so that's you got to have the gravy or the sauce to go on that. So I'm a Southern gravy kind of girl.
So this is also a good teaching moment. I have a canner back here that the dial gauge has malfunctioned. Isn't working. John's like, I don't know who you're talking to. I don't know when this is going to come down to zero. So what do you do if you have a canner that doesn't have a dial gauge? Yeah, you can tap it. So you can tap the canner, and you saw me kind of, huh? No. This is beyond somebody's, yeah. You could tap the canner to see if this will give off any steam. And if it doesn't give off steam, you can also just kind of flick it with your finger. I have no steam,
Yep.
a little bit
Steam.
coming out. So I'm still going to wait. The other thing you can do is you can wait until it's more cool to the touch. I can tell this canner is still very, very hot. So if you're not working with a dial gauge, you can kind of flick this or tap the canner to see if some of the steam will release. If it does, you know you're still under pressure. Or if it's super hot, you're still under pressure. Yes, ma'am.
Did you know that it wasn't working because it didn't go down? Is that your factor there?
Didn't go
I knew
up.
because it never went up. So the dial gauge has a needle on it. My needle never moved up through my
Even
whole
though it was
canning
on high
process.
heat. For
Yeah, this is the one that I moved over here. So,
Shouldn't it be going down?
oh, I see what you're saying. No, I had pressure because my weight was jiggling at the intervals that it's supposed to. So I knew I had achieved pressure, even though my dial gauge failed me.
That's the nice thing about using a weight as opposed to the petcock, is you always know you've got the right pressure when you have the weight on there. I have used one that was somebody else's, and it has the petcock that you just tip when you're done venting, but then you really have to make sure that you've tested your gauge, that you're good with your maintenance, and you know that gauge is right on.
Yep. Anytime anything goes wrong with your pressure canner, and when I say wrong, I just mean like it's making a noise, you don't know what the noise is, or it seems like steam is escaping from places that it shouldn't, or it's screeching at you, or it's violently spinning, with its weight. Remember, you are in control of the pressure canner. You control everything with a turn of a knob. You control everything with the heat. So at any time you feel your heart rate start to rise with something that is not correct, just turn off that heat and reassess the situation. You can always let it go back down to pressure. You can always fix the lid or check the vent pipe for a clog. You can always do those things as long as you're in control. So just turn off the heat and then reassess and fix it. Okay. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you come back next year. Tomorrow we are giving away another All-American 921. I don't know exactly what time that'll be, but we'll be doing another drawing for tomorrow. If you want to stay and hang out and ask questions, we'll be up here for a while. I haven't even started the timer on that, so I got 75 minutes once I start the timer, so I'll be up here for a little while if you guys have questions, and Tammy will be too.
And I got some dishes to do, so.
Yeah, Tammy's got dishes to do. I'm not doing dishes.
I'm not done when I'm done because I didn't get my dishes done. I was talking to all of you.
I'm turn this over a little bit.
You talked about putting the water in the meat instead of dry cleaning. When you do potatoes, do you dry can those?
No, I don't. I always do.
I dry can. Yeah.
She's more rebel than the rebel canner.
Okay. So when you dry can the potatoes, do you get liquid out of them as well?
Yeah, you're going to get a starchy liquid on the bottom of the jar. So typically what you'll see is the potatoes glued together almost on the bottom of the jar. And what you really want to do to help with that is rinse, 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 and soak, soak, soak. So I will rinse and soak for almost 24 hours, changing out the water multiple times. And people say, oh, well, you're washing away all the starch and you're getting rid of all the great nutrients. There is still so much starch in those jars when you're done. I guarantee you cannot get rid of it all. So that's how I do it.
In my defense, 3 years ago, I canned 300 to 400 pounds of potatoes. I need my jars back. I'm not canning any more potatoes until they're gone.
Yeah, we don't can a lot of potatoes either. The things that keep well in other food preservation techniques like potatoes, onions, garlics, things that you can keep in root cellars or cool, dark places, I don't have as much of a need to preserve those things. So I kind of said this earlier today, don't put all your eggs in a canning basket. You need to really diversify. If you're talking food security, food independence, you really need to be diversifying how you are preserving that food. Canning is an excellent method for that, but it is not the only one.
I just had 300 some pounds given to me, so.
No, I'm
I
not
had
doing
to
that
get
many
them
potatoes.
put away fast. They hadn't been cured, so it wasn't like they were going to sit in my root cellar.
Anybody else?
Question.
Sure.
Have you ever done, like I make salsa,
Yeah.
but I was going to try to make mango salsa.
Yeah,
Do you do the same amount of time?
I do. My mango salsa recipe comes directly from the Ball Blue Book. So if you're using that one, or no, I'm sorry, it's the Ball Complete Home Preservation Guide. That's the one I use for my mango salsa. And I
still
believe
using
it is
my
the
King
same times because they both have lemon juice in them. So they're both the same acidity.
I'm pretty sure they're both either 15 or 20 minutes. The
Don't
same,
ask me
whatever.
that off the top of
It's
my
either
head.
One or the other, 15 or 20 minutes, but it's the same time.
Another question.
Okay, hang on real quick. I'll come right back to you. Go ahead.
On salsa, I have a question. I don't know if you know the answer, or if there is an answer, but like the recipe calls for like X amount of like bell peppers and then an X amount of spicy peppers,
Yeah.
and you don't want to use the spicy
Yeah.
peppers. Can you just
Leave 'em
substitute
out?
that quantity
Yeah.
for?
Sure can.
Just use
Same
more.
amount of
Just use the same amount of bell.
Yep.
Well, that's what I thought, but Ball didn't answer that.
Yeah, so Ball's not going to answer. Okay, so,
They won't.
okay, here we go. There hasn't been any testing on our recipes for a very, very long time, and it's because our government has decided that that is not an importance. They have not put any money towards that. So our Ball recipes that we have are the same recipes that were given to us in the 60s. Now, they did retest them in the 80s, but they retested the old recipes. They didn't retest any new ones. They just took the old recipes and they retested them again. So we currently have not had any new recipes from our U.S. government since the 60s. So when people look at the Ball Blue Books, they look at them as kind of biblical because they've been around and tested for so long, which is great. But there is a whole generation 5, 6 generations of people that have been doing and canning things that were never by that book, you know. So the Ball Blue book will tell you you can't use more than 1 onion in a spaghetti sauce because it changes the pH, and then you can't water bath it and whatever. And you will have canners say, all I do is add a little citric acid or a little lemon juice that raises the acidity, it's fine in the water bath canning. And you have canners like me, I will do anything and everything not to water bath can. I hate it.
I hate water bath canning too.
It's okay, baby. She doesn't mean it.
I know. Tammy's like, I got the water bath recipes. I'm like, I do a lot of jams and jellies, don't get me wrong, but I will try to stay away from that thing as much as possible. So
She's young. She doesn't need the facial from the steam. Those of us who've been around longer know how good that is for the complexion.
I'm like 5 years younger than her. I don't even want to hear it.
I wish I was 5 years older than you.
I'm not going to do this on camera, but I am pretty sure we are not that far apart. Okay, anyways, doesn't matter. Where was I at with that? So a lot of times we have these recipes that have really been tested, and they say, you know, 1 onion is great, but 2 onions is too many. But if you use your common sense and if you do your research and you know how to raise the acidity of foods by adding things like vinegar or lemon juice, most of the time those things are okay. Substituting out peppers, you're going to be okay. An argument you will see a lot on the internet is about tomatoes. Water bath, pressure can. Add the lemon juice, don't add the lemon juice. In your Ball Blue book, one recipe will say 55 minutes and the other recipe, same exact thing, will say 45 minutes. And you're like, why the difference? Most of the time with all of those recipes that have been tested, they are more concerned with the density of a food than the acidity. Because it's the density that heats at different temperatures and different pressures than it is the actual acidity. So that's why a crushed tomato recipe will be less time than a quarter tomato recipe or half tomatoes.
But what about diced? Never mind. I'm sorry. I can't help it. It's like they get so nitpicky, and it's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's a tomato is a tomato. You know, it's still a tomato.
Again, always do your research, right? It is your kitchen, and at the end of the day, it's your kitchen, and you're going to preserve your food the way you want to. We can always guide you. The internet can always guide you. Books can always guide you. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to pull all those resources together and kind of make a decision. Okay, coming back to you. Sorry. Did I interrupt you?
That's right.
Okay.
So I'm originally from Brazil, and we cook a lot, make a lot of stews with oxtail.
Yeah.
Ooh, yummy.
So my kids love it, and I want to do, make the stews with like the oxtail.
Yeah.
But I want to make in the big jars,
Yeah.
the half gallon.
Oh, okay. That's another conversation. Go ahead.
That's
You
my
got it.
department. It is no longer recommended that you can anything in half-gallon jars except for juices. What's the other one? There's 2.
Juices is the only one I know of.
Juices and tomatoes. Like the tomato sauce, like kind of thing. Not like anything fancy, tomatoes. They haven't updated the times on that because people stopped having large families as a whole. So if you want to know that information, you have to go to the Rebel sources. We have the old chart, the old chart, and we still post that. You can read it in the Facebook group Rebel Canners. And then they tell you there's a formula, and if you
It's a
add
percentage
so much
formula,
time of
yeah.
percent, and you can sit there and do the math of what you'd have to add from. But it's pretty much like she said, they were doing that in the 1960s. It just fell away from favor. A lot of things in canning fall away from favor, and it's not necessarily because of science. You know, so I do can some things in half gallons because we use juice in half gallons. You know, so I do a lot of my juices and stuff in half gallons. So, you know,
Can it be done? Yes, but
Yeah.
again, do your research. There's
not
got to be stuff.
recommended.
Yeah, there's got to be stuff online. Antique canning books, you guys, are very, very friendly. very friendly in my opinion. There are a lot of lost recipes in those old canning books. And I'm not talking about like the ones, you know, from 20 years ago. I'm talking about go to an antique shop and find the old Kerr books from the early 1900s.
The number one thing you have to watch with those is there's two things.
Oven canning.
Oven canning
There's some
was
oven
never a
canning
thing.
in there.
It was never a thing. I found one book that mentions oven canning, and they're like, after 1 year, they said don't do that. But so even for rebel canners, that's too rebel. But in 1980, when they retested the recipes, they updated the time for the fish. So before 1980, it will have the same time as canning beef and chicken.
Yeah. I forgot
After
about that.
1980, they added more time to the fish. So if you're looking at those old recipes, be aware of things like that you need to do more time on the fish. You know, do you really have to? I ate the fish that was canned at that time and I lived. No, maybe you don't. But I'd rather err on the side of caution. Even as a rebel, I'll follow the new fish time.
Part of being a rebel is which rules do you want to bend without breaking, and so you can't know that until you have experience. I always tell new canners, stick to your canning books. Don't come at me with, can I do this with flour in it? You're not there yet. You're not there yet. You have to understand the basics and the science behind it and why something will work versus why it won't work before you can test how far over the speed limit you want to go.
If you don't know the rule, you shouldn't be breaking it.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
a
what I
good
say.
one.
If you don't know the rule and why it's there, don't break it.
If you put the bones in
Yeah.
with the meat, is it the same time?
It's usually less time.
Less?
Yeah, usually. I think it does depend. I know chicken is less. Beef might be the same or more.
I think beef is the same. It's
I'm
just
sure we could
chicken,
get a canning book up here if we need it, but yeah.
It's in the car.
It's going to be dependent on what type of meat and what type of bone. I personally don't like using bones in my jars because I feel like it takes up valuable space in the jar and it doesn't give me as much food in the jar as I like, but that's just my opinion.
The flavor is
Yes.
so good.
So here's the secret to that.
Yeah, cook it in the
pressure
cook it first.
and make your broth with your oxtail. You pressure cook that broth and make it.
put
Draw
that in a jar.
all the marrow out. Put a little dash of vinegar in there to help draw out the marrow and the mineralization from. I want to touch that, and I know it's hot. Mineralization from the bones.
Stop touching
and
it.
then use that broth to make your soup. So then you don't have that space taken up in the jar. And you still get the flavor, and you still get the marrow, and you still get all those things drawn out.
Yep.
This is like the Food Network. I'm getting hungry.
I know, right?
I have
I
that
can
effect
smell
on
that
all
chicken
people.
over there.
I'm told I have that effect on everybody. You have to,
You're making it all day. Look at that. They're cooking right there. So what time is dinner?
yeah.
You're looking at your tomatoes and you're like, gosh, I just don't know. Okay, compare to the
Cook them a little bit more.
not gonna miss anything.
Your tomato is not going to get rubbery if you cook it for another 10 minutes. You do that all the time. You throw it in the soup pot and you let it boil, and it actually tastes better after it's cooked a little longer. So your tomato will actually taste better if it's cooked at the longer time.
Yeah.
It's not,
So there's benchmarks in canning. When you're pressure canning, your benchmarks are time and pressure/temperature, because pressure and temperature come together. Those are the two benchmarks, and your canning books will tell you what those benchmarks are. You can certainly go over those. So if your teacher says you have to pass this class with an 80% and you pass with a 90, you've still passed the class, right? It's kind of that same kind of concept. You have to hit those two benchmarks. If you don't hit one, you blew the whole thing. You have to hit both. Going over doesn't hurt anything. Going under is when things start getting questionable. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, I'm gonna start cleaning up. We will be up here in the front if you guys need anything. Thank you. Thank you for coming.